Chapter 1074. This question was heavy and straightforward, concise and to the point. Even Li Huaqing was stunned for nearly half a minute. Chen Fangqing was not in a hurry, quietly waiting for the other party's reply. Li Huaqing came back to his senses, but he did not speak. Instead, he began to think quietly. The Prince Group fully supported Hua Jingyang. This was a question that the academics had never considered before, because everyone thought it was unlikely. The Prince Group was a supergroup that had existed since the founding of the People's Republic. It had ups and downs, but it had never fallen out of the ranks of the top groups. Among the six, the Prince Group had the longest history, the most profound foundation, and the extremely solid foundation in all aspects. Even today, the Prince Group maintained a very close relationship with some retired but still had a strong influence on the old people. This was a fatal disadvantage that the academics, a new group that had a short time to rise, did not have. And the existence of those old people not only had a strong influence on the Prince Group, but also on different members of the six. However, with the rise of the new group, the Prince Group would inevitably be greatly weakened, and all aspects would be affected. The reason why the Prince Group could exist since the founding of the People's Republic and always be in the ranks of the top groups was that each of their leaders had a very strong group concept. To explain it in an inaccurate but easy-to-understand term, the so-called group concept was selfishness. This kind of concept would overemphasize the group's future, protect its shortcomings, and cause some short-sighted decisions. But at the same time, such a concept would greatly strengthen the cohesion within the group. Chen Fangqing was definitely an outlier in the Prince Group. But Guo Wenyan took this concept to the extreme. Simply put, in the overall situation of Zhongzhou State and the group's future, Chen Fangqing would think that the overall situation of Zhongzhou State was overriding. In Guo Wentian's heart, he also thought that the overall situation of Zhongzhou State was more important, but that was all. So even if he had a seemingly correct understanding, he would always consider some internal problems of the group in some decisions and implementation. Outsiders had no right to judge whether this concept was right or wrong. Li Huaqing was not qualified either. But Li Huaqing had the vision to see clearly how the Prince Group would choose in this situation. The Prince Group was now really in a precarious situation. According to their past habits, at this time, the most important thing they should do was to completely withdraw their wings, throw away all the interests that they were reluctant to give up but had to give up, and plan their future. According to their strategic goals, after this election, their biggest demand was to occupy 2 places on the Council of Zhongzhou State, which would also be the goal they would strive for after giving up Chen Fangqing. At present, Guo Wenyan would continue to be re-elected, and the candidate for the other council members still needed their internal coordination and research. Under such circumstances, they needed enough time to straighten out all kinds of relationships, so as to save as many things as possible. Not to mention supporting the academics, under such circumstances, it was impossible for them to intervene in anything other than the internal problems of the Prince Group. They would only do their best to achieve their own goals. Now, Chen Fangqing asked him how confident Hua Jingyang was if he got the full support of Prince Group. The key was, how much support was this so-called full support? Li Huaqing thought silently, and he suddenly found it difficult to answer this question. Every election was filled with turbulent times. Whether it was those who could be re-elected or those who were striving for a higher position, no one could be alone. Competition was everywhere. Even if they could continue to be re-elected, they had to carefully think about how they should express their attitude in the situation, what attitude they should express, and how they should express their attitude. In countless competitions, there would always be one position that became the focus of all the competition. It was the same in this election. Before the final battle in North Sea, the competition between Yi Dongxing and Wang Qinglei was the core focus. This kind of competition lasted for nearly 2 years, and the activities of both sides were extremely frequent. It even caused some internal turmoil in the Southeast Group, which could be said to be a joke to outsiders. Now that the final battle in North Sea was over, it meant that Wang Qinglei was automatically out. But the focus of the competition did not disappear. Instead, with the vacancy of Chen Fangqing, the focus of the competition directly shifted to the position of the head of the cabinet. The Prince group now had no suitable candidate to compete for this position. The new group had risen for a short time, and it also did not have this ability. The North group of Eternal Soy Sauce was busy trying to integrate with the new group. The giant group could not push out a competitive candidate to compete for this position for the time being. Everyone knew that the new Prime Minister of Zhongzhou State was either from the academics or from the Southeast group. Wen Xiyuan, the Speaker of Beihai, a member of Zhongzhou State. Hua Xingyang, the Deputy Prime Minister of the Cabinet. At present, these two were the most promising candidates for this position. Each had its advantages and disadvantages. In terms of ability, no matter who it was, they were absolutely qualified to be the Prime Minister. Hua Xingyang's advantage was that he had served as the Deputy Prime Minister for one term and was more familiar with the cabinet. In this position, it was tantamount to taking advantage of the situation. From a deputy to a top leader, there was no need for running in. His disadvantage was that Li Huaqing would be re-elected. The number 1 and 2 figures were both from the academics, which would undoubtedly make others extremely uneasy. With uneasiness, there would naturally be backlash and opposition. And Wen Xiyuan's advantage was that he could get a lot of support more easily. The giant group, the new group, the North group, and the Southeast group all preferred Wen Xiyuan to be in this position. His disadvantage was that his position was not as competitive as Hua Xingyang's. But if the academics could get the full support of the Prince group, the situation was completely different. The current Prince group and the academics were no longer the Prince group and the academics more than 2 years ago. Similarly, the current giant group and the Southeast group were no longer the giant group and the Southeast group more than 2 years ago. In the past 2 years, the two groups, the Southeast group and the giant group, had constantly compromised and completed the internal reshuffle and change of blood. The cooperation between Li Huaqing and Qin Fangqing was aggressive and aggressive. They took advantage of the time when the other party changed blood and shuffled the cards. The power of the two groups had been greatly expanded, and the power of the Southeast group and the giant group had been greatly locked. It was no exaggeration to say that when Li Huaqing and Qin Fangqing stood together, they now represented the two largest groups in Zhongzhou State. If they fully cooperated, the possibility of pushing Hua Xingyang to the top, Li Huaqing thought for a while and finally confirmed a fact. If they fully cooperated, the possibility of Hua Xingyang being promoted was very, very, very great. Really? Li Huaqing asked in a deep voice. I just met Wen Tian. Qin Fangqing said lightly, I'm sitting here now, representing more than myself. If it were before, Qin Fangqing wouldn't have said it, and Li Huaqing wouldn't have asked. But now, whether Qin Fangqing could still represent the Prince group became a very serious question, so serious that he had to seriously emphasize it. If that's the case, the possibility of Xingyang being promoted is very high. Li Huaqing said slowly, at least 80% sure. 80% sure, Qin Fangqing muttered to himself and then smiled. I thought I was 100% sure, which was lower than expected. But in fact, 80% is not low. There is no absolute in the world. How can there be a 100% success rate? Li Huaqing shook his head. How are you going to operate? It's a little difficult, but I can still do it. Qin Fangqing subconsciously rubbed his forehead. His headache had been continuing today. Instead of being relieved, the pain became more and more intense each time. Maybe he should go to the hospital. It just so happened that he would be free soon. Qin Fangqing laughed at himself in his heart, but his voice was still calm. Wen Tian and I will unify the voices of the group in the shortest time possible. Now the comrades are a little restless. It's not good to be too impetuous. Yes, we are already very passive. We can't be the first to be chaotic. Li Huaqing said with deep thought. Who do you think is more optimistic about in the Prince group? Wen Tian is experienced and steady. I think it's relatively easy to find someone who can cooperate with him in the group. Qin Fangqing suddenly asked with a smile. Li Huaqing was stunned for less than a second before he reacted. There was no doubt that this was the condition put forward by Qin Fangqing, or the Prince group. The Prince group would fully support Hua Xingyang, and in return, the academics must fully support another member of the Prince group to become a director of Zhongzhou State, even if his ranking was lower. To be honest, the result of the alliance between the Prince Group and the academics was that both Hua Xingyang and the candidate director of the Prince Group would be resisted by the other groups. If they didn't cooperate, the other groups would focus on Hua Xingyang. After getting a satisfactory result, even the new groups wouldn't pursue the Prince Group. Undoubtedly, it was easier for them to achieve their demands. Now they had the academics as an ally, but they had a few more enemies for no reason. This was not the safest way, but it was the most compromise. So Li Huaqing did not hesitate and immediately laughed. This is your own business. In my opinion, several comrades are relatively qualified. I'm afraid you and Wen Tian have something to discuss. This statement was very clear. Chen Fangqi nodded. Li Huaqing could not criticize the candidates of the Prince Group. His statement that several comrades were qualified was already a very clear attitude. Let's go back and discuss it, Chen Fangqi said. Li Huaqing nodded with a smile, and his eyes were a little twinkling. He suddenly realized that this cooperation with the Prince Group was a last resort for Chen Fangqi, but for the academics, there was suddenly a lot more room for operation. The sudden increase of leeway meant that even if Hua Xingyang failed, he could guarantee that the academics would not lose anything. All kinds of thoughts flashed in his mind for a moment, and then he heard Chen Fangqing's voice again. At present, it seems that there are still a lot of things to solve in the Southeast Group. Wang Qinglei can't go to Beihai this time, but his status is there. In addition, it is said that Wang Xiaoyao has reached the peak of the invincible realm. They also have a lot of hidden dangers inside. Although my decision did not succeed in a sense, it also slowed down the pace of the Wang family of Beihai. In the next few years, they should focus on stability and not be too radical. His voice paused for a second and then he continued, now the one who should be worried or even vigilant is Li Tunlun. Nanyue, Xia, Jiangnan, Dongtan. Before and after this election, 4 provinces will fall into his hands, which is enough to form the basic framework of a new group. But don't forget, the resources in his hands are not only 4 provinces, but also Jiangxia. The area of 5 provinces is enough for the new group to complete the primitive accumulation and rise quickly. In fact, I have learned about the new group in detail before. Although their talent reserve is a little insufficient, in some aspects, it is already very perfect. Now there is Zhou Yuanshan in Jiangxia, and the new group has taken over Nanyue, which is equivalent to completely paving the way for Zhou Yuanshan to enter the parliament and even become a director. In the future, when Tiannan officially becomes a province, Ning Qianxing will also enter the parliament. Now Wu Jingmin and Bai Qingqian can work for 1 term. Wu Jingmin is old and will retire after 1 term. Bai Qingqian can take advantage of the situation and Zhou Yuanshan can be transferred to Nanyue, so he can naturally become a member. After 1 term, Bai Qingqian is very likely to continue to be re-elected. After all, she is not old. At that time, Zhou Yuanshan can take a step up to become a director. At that time, Chen Fangqi thought about it and smiled coldly. At that time, Tiannan will basically become Tiannan province, and Ning Qianxing will become a member of Zhongzhou state. Plus the new speaker of Nanyue, and the North group that has completed the initial integration, 10 years. The clearest thing we can see now is 10 years. 10 years later, the new group will become a supergroup with 2 directors and at least 3 members of parliament. At least 3 members of parliament. President, don't you have any feelings about such a scale? What do you mean? Li Huaqing looked up at Chen Fangqi. He knew more than Chen Fangqi. In the current situation, having 2 directors of Zhongzhou state was indeed a configuration that only top groups could have, but the configuration of 3 members of parliament was slightly insufficient. If it was 10 years later, in his expectation, the new group would have 2 directors of Zhongzhou State Council and about 5 to 7 members of parliament. If only looking at the high-level strength, this was basically the configuration of the academics and the Prince Group today. After Li Tianlan owned the Flourishing Age Fund, it was not only the North Group that was annexed and integrated, but the power of the giant group was also gradually approaching the new group. From this point of view, the comprehensive influence of the new group was already top. With Wu Jingmin, although Dongqing Wudi was the leader of the giant group, he could also be regarded as a major pillar of the new group. However, Li Huaqing had long let go of his dissatisfaction. The current situation might not be what he wanted to see, but no matter what, such a thing had happened in the end. He had tried to stop it, and so had Chen Fangqing, but they did not succeed. In this case, Li Huaqing could only welcome their rise and do his best to guide them to play the right role and move in the right direction. The new group, Emperor Dong's palace, Li Tianlan, this is already a problem that cannot be ignored. I can say with certainty that the existence of Li Tianlan and Emperor Dong's palace is even more dangerous to Zhongzhou state than the Wang family of Beihai. We must try our best to compress his existence space and reduce his sense of existence. Otherwise, the consequences will be unpredictable. The most obvious example is that Beihai is Beihai of Zhongzhou state. But what did the people on Mount Dibing do? Chen Fangqing's tone was a little excited. Beihai has so many resources: oil, natural gas, all kinds of minerals, forests, land resources, and even water resources. How much has Beihai swallowed over so many years? How much has it given to Zhongzhou state? Less than 60% on average. This 60% is shared by a country, and Beihai can get 40%. They are completely lying on the blood vessels of Zhongzhou state to suck blood. Beihai has the best water source in the world, and they are 100% monopolizing it. Have you seen the market survey of the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Commerce 2 years ago? Every year, part of the mineral water sold by Beihai to Zhongzhou state costs more than 200 yuan per barrel, close to 300 yuan. They say it's water for nobles. Nobles? How can there be nobles in Zhongzhou state? There is no King nobles. On the land of Zhongzhou state, every grass and every tree belongs to the country and the people. How dare they? How dare they? And the land? The land of 150,000 square kilometers in Beihai can only support less than 20 million people. The cabinet has been paying attention to this matter. I paid attention to it when I was in office. My predecessor and even my predecessor were thinking about this problem. In the most beautiful province of Zhongzhou state, the transfer of people's household registration is more complicated than immigration. Now the little bastard Wang Shengxiao even closed this channel. How dense is the population of Zhongzhou state? How tight are the land resources? The cabinet issues policies every day and discusses them every year. Is it useful? Zhongzhou state doesn't want to occupy the land of Beihai. I can understand the treaty of that year. Zhongzhou state is willing to spend money and buy it. Beihai belongs to Zhongzhou state. We just want Beihai to develop more reasonably. Is that wrong? What did Wang Tianzong say? Not for sale. There is no room for negotiation at all. Beihai is not a big agricultural province. Its tertiary industry is developed and its land planting area is very small. Because Beihai is rich and can be bought outside. What do they use the land for? If these lands are handed over to Zhongzhou state for overall planning, we can move at least 40 to 60 million people to Beihai, at least. And it won't bring too much change to Beihai. The Ministry of Construction has plans to build houses, schools, hospitals, and traffic networks. They are absolutely reasonable. But what does Mount Dibing want to do with Beihai? They build King parks, plant flowers and grass, and cultivate forests. The whole province is full of flowers. The green area is even much larger than the residential area. What do they want to do? What do they want to do? They made Beihai the most beautiful province, the most comfortable province, and the happiest province. But does all this have anything to do with Zhongzhou state? Does it have anything to do with it? Mount Dibing wants to use these things to bind everyone in Beihai for loyalty, cohesion, and a sense of belonging. What is the self-introduction of people in Beihai when they walk in Zhongzhou state or any country in the world? Am I from Zhongzhou state? No, there is no such saying. They will say that I am from Beihai, Beihai. They have the most comfortable living environment, the most beautiful province, the most relaxed life, the highest salary, the lowest housing price, the fairest environment, and the most leisurely holidays. Aristocrats, the aristocratic province of Zhongzhou state? *CK. He talked incessantly. Chen Fangqing had already seen his ending, so at this moment, he seemed to want to say all the words that he had been suppressing in his heart. His voice was completely roaring, as if he wanted to tear the roof off. His loud voice was so loud that even Ma Si, who was outside, could hear it clearly. Li Huaqing silently watched him vent his emotions almost hysterically. His eyes were quiet with a touch of pity. "I've had enough of this, Beihai." Chen Fangqing took several deep breaths and continued, "I wanted to smash it, but I failed. And now there is another Tianan. There are signs of this in Tianan now. If it continues to develop, it will be even more excessive than Beihai. Xianyuan City and even the whole Tianan need fewer people. They all want the best. They will use the resources of Zhongzhou State to build their own foundation. If we don't restrict it, Emperor Dong's palace will be as arrogant as Beihai is at its peak." Li Huaqing was silent for a long time before he slowly exhaled and calmly said, "There is a problem that you have forgotten." "What?" Chen Fangqing frowned. "Beihai belongs to Zhongzhou State." Li Huaqing said, "Tianan will also belong to Zhongzhou State in the future." You have always been very attached to this concept, but have you ever thought that without the Wang family of Beihai and Emperor Dong's palace, Beihai province would still belong to Snow Country and East Island, and Tianan would still belong to Annan? If they didn't bring these to Zhongzhou State, then whether it is Beihai or Tianan, it has nothing to do with us. This is their family property, their bottom line. They entered Zhongzhou State with land that doesn't belong to Zhongzhou State, and they only ask for a certain degree of autonomy, which is reasonable. Chen Fangqing froze. He froze for a full 5 minutes before he gritted his teeth and reluctantly said, "So what? Even if there is no Beihai or Emperor Dong's palace, I believe there will be other forces." "That's right," Li Huaqing said blandly, "then it will be another Beihai and Emperor Dong's palace. In essence, there will be no difference. Anyone who can reach their level will make these demands, no less, only more excessive. This is the foundation that they have worked hard for. Why should they give it to Zhongzhou State unconditionally? They are willing to return to Zhongzhou State because they are from Zhongzhou State. Even if they are saints, they don't give it for free. Put yourself in their shoes. If you stand in Li Tianlan and Wang Tianzong's point of view, will you be willing to see all this?" "But they have gone too far." Chen Fangqing gritted his teeth and said. Li Huaqing nodded and said, "They did have something wrong, so we cooperated before. If we can completely take back Beihai according to your idea, of course I will support it. This has nothing to do with right or wrong, it's just a standpoint. But now the situation is very obvious. We don't have that kind of ability, so we can only accept the reality. In general, whether it is for Beihai or Emperor Dong's palace, I welcome it. Including their blatant theft of the country? Blatant theft of the country's resources?" Chen Fangqing sneered. "They don't steal the country." Li Huaqing shook his head and said, "Maybe you haven't noticed, whether it is Beihai or Emperor Dong's palace, they are very clear-headed. What they do is at most use the resources of a country to run a place. To be exact, they use a part of the limited resources of a country to run a place. For example, Beihai and Tian. But what about Jiang Shangyu, who cooperated with you?" The fierceness in Li Huaqing's eyes flashed away. He intends to use a part of his limited resources to run a country. What virtue does he have? Does he deserve it? What he did is the real theft of the country, and you actually cooperated with such a person. This is what disappoints me the most. Chen Fangqing's body suddenly stiffened, and he suddenly found that he couldn't say a word. Li Huaqing took a deep look at him, exhaled, and looked up at the time. At the same time he looked up, the door of the office was knocked. The door was slowly pushed open, and Ma Si, Li Huaqing's secretary, came in. He looked at the two giants sitting in the office and said softly, "President, His Majesty Li Tianlan is here." Chapter 1075. Ma Si stood straight at the door. When he reported to Li Huaqing, he never looked at Chen Fangqing out of the corner of his eyes. The smoke lingered in the office. Li Huaqing nodded. He stood up at the same time and looked at Chen Fangqing. Chen Fangqing also stood up. Li Huaqing thought he was going to leave, but Chen Fangqing said flatly, "Since we are here, we have to see each other." Li Huaqing smiled and said nothing. He got up and walked out of the office. Chen Fangqing followed him expressionlessly, a little behind Li Huaqing by half a body. The hidden dragon sea outside the office was silvery white, and the air was bitterly cold. Standing in front of the office door and looking out, on an arch bridge 100 meters away, Li Tianlan was taking off his gorgeous windbreaker that terrified the whole dark world and putting it on Qin Weibai. The black windbreaker fluttered lazily. Qin Weibai naturally took his arm. Li Huaqing and Chen Fangqing watched in silence, with complicated feelings. 5 years. In less than 6 years, the young couple in sight, or the young couple, completed the identity exchange without anyone realizing. More than 5 years ago, Li Tianlan was 19 and Qin Weibai was 24. At that time, Li Tianlan was a greenhorn, but he was not unknown. With the last remaining light of the Li family, he tried his best to show his edge, but not many people really paid attention to him. That year, Qin Weibai had already taken control of the Samsara Palace. She was the only will of the Samsara Palace when the will of the master of Samsara Palace was silent. She was quiet, low-key, and busy most of the time. The development of Zhongzhou State, the European continent, America, and the Samsara Palace reflected her will everywhere. It might not be clear, but it always existed. She rarely appeared in any so-called high-end circle, but no one in the real high-end circle would ignore her. She was the goddess in countless people's hearts and the first beauty in Zhongzhou State. There were countless people who admired her, but few dared to stand in front of her and look directly into her eyes. Wang Xiaoyao of the Wang family of Beihai, Jiang Qianyan of the Jiang family of South America, 2 princes in the European Union, young business tycoons, those so-called big shots who seemed to have everything with their family background, strength, and elegance, had never received any response from her. She lingered in everyone's most beautiful and dreamy dreams, quiet, beautiful, picturesque, and beautiful. No one knew what was going on with Li Tianlan, or what kind of luck he had. The heir of the Li family? The young heavenly son? These seemingly worthless things at that time did not bring Li Tianlan any honor, but they secretly caused a lot of trouble. At that time, the 19-year-old Li Tianlan was even funny in the eyes of many real bigwigs. At that time, Li Tianlan of the mountain, the Li of the Ming of palace of the world. The perfect goddess appeared beside him, unscrupulously blossoming with astonishing brilliance. In just a few short years, she filled the entire dark world. In the final battle of Heaven Capital, the purgatory of Heaven Capital rose. Then came the chaos of Snow Country. Zhongzhou State, Snow Country, 5 European countries, Dark Knights, Rothschild, Holy Land, Men in Black, Fantasy World, Jiang family of South America, Shadow Throne, one superpower after another, one country after another, hundreds of thousands of troops. The whole world was in turmoil. Reki City, Mormons, blood flowed like a river. That was the most bloody and cruel end of the last era. Invincible like grass. The famous experts on the divine and holy list were dying. That was the end of the era. It was not the end. Instead, it completely shattered the whole structure of the whole era in a way that no one could imagine. The light of the eternal sword above Mormons, with the lingering sound of that era, shattered all the shadows and directly opened the door to a new era. Just like now. The era and sky that belonged to Li Tianlan. The final battle in Beihai might not be the plan of Samsara Palace, nor was it Qin Weibai's doing. But everyone knew very well that when the eternal sword light pierced Wang Tianzong's chest above Mormons, the final battle in Beihai had become inevitable. There was no need to plan anything, no need to push anything. Whether Wang Tianzong was seriously injured or killed, the final battle in Beihai was bound to happen. So the last invincible realm experts of East Island and Holy Land all died in the final battle in Beihai. The Jiang family of South America fell. Most of the forces in the Dark World disappeared. The whole Dark World was in ruins. In the ruins, the dynasty belonging to Emperor Dong's palace was being built. It was clear and ferocious, with its claws and teeth, unstoppable. That year, Li Tianlan was 24 years old. Qin Weibai was 29 years old. In more than 5 years, Li Tianlan had matured, become powerful, and invincible in a flash. Qin Weibai didn't change at all. Time didn't leave any trace on her, but it took away the sharpness that she had never exposed in front of others. Today, she lived in the headquarters of the Lin clan and stood aloof from the world. Beside Li Tianlan, she was gentle and charming. In a trance, it seemed that she no longer had the shadow that stirred up the whole dark world. She was gradually being ignored, and she was willing to do so. But Li Tianlan stood on the top of the world, invincible. The identity and status between the two seemed to have changed a long time ago. But only at this time, when the young couple officially appeared in the hidden Dragon Sea and stood in front of Li Huaqing and Chen Fangqing, when the well-behaved Qin Weibai and the indifferent Li Tianlan stood together, the impact became particularly strong, like a huge wave, fiercely hitting the consciousness of Li Huaqing and Chen Fangqing. In a trance, Li Tianlan and Qin Weibai had come over. Masi coughed. Li Huaqing quickly came to his senses, touched Chen Fangqing, walked down the steps, and reached out to shake hands with Li Tianlan. "Welcome, you two." Qin Weibai stood beside Li Tianlan, smiled gently and quietly, and didn't say anything. "You're welcome, President." Li Tianlan smiled, turned his eyes, and fell on Chen Fangqing. Chen Fangqing stood silently, without reaching out or smiling, just looking at him expressionlessly. "What are you doing here?" Li Tianlan frowned and asked impolitely. "It's just a coincidence," Chen Fangqing said indifferently. The two sides had really shed all pretenses of cordiality, and they would really fight to the death. If it was in public, for the sake of the overall situation, the two might pretend, but in this situation, there was no need for politeness between them. "I'm the Prime Minister of Zhongzhou State. Isn't it normal to discuss work with the President? But Your Highness, as soon as you arrived in Yuzhou, you can't wait to come to the Hidden Dragon Sea. Your manners are ugly, and it's inevitable that you lose your demeanor. I asked Tianlan to bring me here." Qin Weibai smiled and said softly, "I'm a woman, and I never care about demeanor. I'm just a little curious, and I want to see what the Prime Minister, who has been targeting my man for the past 2 years, will look like now. If I hadn't met you here, I think we would have taken the initiative to visit later. Your current expression, compared with your last expression, should be very interesting." "You." Chen Fangqing's face turned livid. Qin Weibai's voice was too gentle and too straightforward, so straightforward that even Chen Fangqing felt a little powerless to refute. He was silent for a few seconds, and then said with a gloomy face, "When men talk, when it's a woman's turn to interrupt?" He glanced at Li Tianlan, and still called him with that somewhat harsh title, "Your Highness, you really have a good upbringing." Li Tianlan's eyes narrowed and he said gloomily, "Who do you think you are? How dare you judge my woman?" In the power center of Zhongzhou State, looking at the Prime Minister of Zhongzhou State and asking him what he was, this was simply the first time in the world, and it was a humiliation that didn't need to be emphasized too much. Not to mention how Chen Fangqing felt, even Li Huaqing, who was beside him, felt offended. He was a little unhappy, but he had completely understood Li Tianlan's attitude. Strong. Such an attitude also meant that on the topic of the new group, there were many things that Li Tianlan was not going to leave any room for compromise at all. "You two, enough is enough. We don't meet here to quarrel." Li Huaqing said slowly. "You're right." Li Tianlan nodded. "I just want him to recognize himself. At such an old age, how dare he talk about upbringing here shamelessly? His own precious daughter is nearly 50 years old, and she has 9 lovers outside, 5 of whom are students at school. I have all kinds of high-definition videos of all kinds of information here. How about it, Prime Minister? Do you want me to send you a copy? Or should I make it public on the internet? Upbringing. Do you also know what upbringing is?" "How dare you?" Chen Fangqing growled, and his face was ferocious. A touch of blood and sweetness gushed out of his throat, and he swallowed it down. Tearing. The blood seemed to tear the blood vessels, and he felt cold all over. He had a splitting headache, and his whole head began to become numb in the severe pain. "I will do that," Li Tianlan said lightly, "but after you get out of this position, I will give you an absolutely satisfactory explanation for the 62 people in your Chen family." Li Huaqing's tone suddenly became a little heavier. "This is Hidden Dragon Sea. His eyes were quiet and dignified, with an obvious warning. Li Tianlan sneered and walked directly up the steps with Qin Weibai. Ma Si bowed slightly and opened the office door respectfully. Li Huaqing took a deep breath, patted Chen Fangqing on the shoulder, and turned back into the office without saying a word. The office door was closed. Chen Fangqing stood silently in the deep cold snow for a long time. The smoke in the office had not dissipated. Li Huaqing turned on the ventilation system, made a new pot of tea, and said with a smile, "It's understandable that the Prime Minister is in a bad mood. Tunlin, there are many times and things that I can't stop you even if I want to. I think the Prime Minister has enough psychological preparation for some results. I'm not going to comment on this, I just want to say, pay attention to the way." Li Tianlan looked down at the gradually boiling tea in front of him, and said in a flat voice, "The way I choose is the most appropriate, and it is what he deserves." Li Huaqing quickly frowned. "What are you going to do?" Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows slightly, and looked a little surprised. "Didn't I just say? When we were outside?" Li Huaqing's movements suddenly stiffened, and even his expression became a little stiff. "What Li Tianlan just said? Put the video of Qin Lijuan on the internet? Let all the members of the Qin family die?" Li Huaqing pondered and did not speak for a long time. Winner takes all, no matter where it is, this is the truth. As a loser, Chen Fangqing had nothing to say. His life and death were already destined. Li Huaqing could accept it, and he could also accept the disappearance of some core members of the Chen family. But Li Tianlan's meaning was very clear. He was not going to let Chen Fangqing, the whole Chen family, and he was not going to leave any leeway. If the Chen family ended up extremely miserable, it would cause extremely strong turbulence in the whole Zhongzhou state, and others would inevitably feel sad. What Li Huaqing wanted was stability, and such a situation was not what he wanted to see. "Tianlan, the Prime Minister did do something wrong, but after all, the others are innocent." Li Huaqing looked at Li Tianlan and said slowly, "Everyone is qualified to say that they are innocent, but Chen Fangqing is not." Li Tianlan said faintly, "The termination plan? Oh, she has already left Beihai and me, and now no one knows where she is." When Chen Fangqing started the termination plan, did he not consider the innocent? According to his style, if the battle in Beihai fails, or if we don't stand the pressure in the past 2 years, what will happen to Beihai? What will happen to Emperor Dong's palace? Li Tianlan looked at Chen Fangqing and said faintly, "It's all the same. I can be sure that if we lose, no one will say that they are innocent, including you." Li Huaqing looked away a little awkwardly. It was undeniable that even in Li Huaqing's heart, he also hoped that Chen Fangqing could completely break up the Wang family of Beihai and then completely suppress Emperor Dong's palace. None of them wanted to see Beihai continue to develop, and no one was willing to see the rise of a new group. Chen Fangqing was like this, and so was Li Huaqing. Li Tianlan could have power, but in their expectations, absorbing Emperor Dong's palace before the Flourishing Age Fund was already the limit of their tolerance. Completely suppressing Emperor Dong's palace and maximizing his personal strength and future was the most correct way of governing a country. It had nothing to do with right or wrong. From the perspective of the overall interests of Zhongzhou state, this was the position that a ruler must have. Chen Fangqing did so. So did Li Huaqing. The only difference between the two was that Chen Fangqing didn't believe in evil when he found that things couldn't be done. He stubbornly insisted on doing it. He used unorthodox methods and unconventional methods, and even joined hands with East Island to start the battle in Beihai. But in the end he still failed. Li Huaqing was much smarter and calmer than Chen Fangqing. After finding that things couldn't be done, he quickly adjusted his mentality and accepted the reality. He was still trying to control the situation within the scope of his control. Now the academics were cooperating with Li Tianlan and the new group, and they were also competing with the new group. At this level, friends and enemies were no longer pure. The relationship between them had been changing subtly, but one thing was certain. Li Huaqing wouldn't have a good impression of Li Tianlan, and Li Tianlan would have the same impression of Li Huaqing. "If we lose, what will happen?" Li Tianlan asked softly. He didn't wait for Li Huaqing to speak and continued, I will die, Wang Xingxiao will die, the Wang family of Beihai and Emperor Dong's palace will be shattered, my women, my brothers, my supporters, none of them will have a good end, and neither will their families. They will die in all kinds of accidents, in prison, in hospitals, and more people will die. The Southeast Group, the Giant Group, the North Group, the Flourishing Age Fund. How many people are there? Have you counted? If there is such a time. Li Tianlan looked at Li Huaqing, and his eyes were as sharp as knives. Will someone stand in your position and say that they are innocent? First of all, will you? Li Huaqing opened his mouth and was about to say something, but Li Tianlan had already said directly, "It doesn't matter whether I will or not." His voice was cold, with a kind of extreme confidence and strength. Because I will not lose. All those who touch the bottom line of Emperor Dong's palace should think about Qin Fangqing's end in the future. Li Huaqing was silent. Dead silence. After a long time, he took a deep breath and said slowly, "Do you know how many years the Prime Minister has worked in Zhongzhou State and what he has done for Zhongzhou State?" "I know, and I can even understand," Li Tianlan said lightly, "but this is not a reason to be forgiven. Families and countries are never completely consistent. I recognize his contribution to Zhongzhou State, and I recognize everyone, every director, and every member of parliament. Even Gu Xingyun, from the perspective of Zhongzhou State, is not a bad person. He has also made a lot of contributions to Zhongzhou State over the years. They all deserve respect, and so does Qin Fangqing." Li Tianlan said calmly, "But this can't be a reason for them to hurt Emperor Dong's palace, nor a reason for me to forgive them. I can do what they can do in the future. I don't have such a long-term vision, and I don't have your so-called overall situation. I only know one thing. Whoever dares to hurt the people around me, Emperor Dong's palace will kill his whole family. He is a meritorious minister, a hero, and he can be anyone. But in my eyes, he is an enemy." Li Huaqing sighed, feeling a little helpless. It was not until this time that he understood why Li Tianlan came directly to Hidden Dragon Sea after arriving in Yuzhou. To discuss some problems of the new group? Maybe there was a reason for this. But the most important thing was that Li Tianlan came here to give him a notice. A notice on how to deal with Qin Fangqing. It was not a discussion, but a notice. So no one could stop Li Tianlan. Qin Fangqing's position was very high, and he had done a lot of hard work. But he chose to become Li Tianlan's enemy. The termination plan was against Wang Yuetong. The battle in North Sea seemed to be against North Sea, but in fact, it was also against Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan could not tolerate all of this. So Li Tianlan wanted to retaliate against Qin Fangqing in the cruelest, coldest, and most gloomy way. He wanted everyone to see what would happen to those who went against Emperor Dong's palace. Since the rise of Emperor Dong's palace, Qin Fangqing was the first opponent with enough qualifications and status. Li Tianlan needed to build the deterrent force of Emperor Dong's palace with his and his family's blood and lives. Put it down gently? It seemed reasonable, but it was not in line with the future of Emperor Dong's palace. What Li Tianlan wanted to do in Yuzhou this time was to be unreasonable. Li Tianlan took out a cigarette and suddenly said, "I'm hungry. Order something to eat." "Shall I order something?" Qin Weibai, who was sitting next to Li Tianlan, stood up with a smile. The food and drink in Hidden Dragon Sea was very rich, but if they only ordered according to the specifications of working meals, everything would be simple. "No need." Li Huaqing smiled and said, "Let Ma Si go." He reached out to touch the call button beside him, but suddenly there was a gentle knock on the door. Ma Si walked in and reported softly, "President, Your Majesty, the Prime Minister has left." Li Huaqing glanced at Ma Si with some doubts. Qin Fangqing did not follow in, so he would not stand outside all the time. It was natural for him to leave. Ma Si glanced at Li Tianlan and hesitated. "Say it. Don't be so hesitant." Li Huaqing shook his head. "Well," the Prime Minister returned to his office, sorted out a lot of documents, and then left the office. "Look at the direction." After a pause, Ma Si looked at Li Huaqing's face and whispered, "Look at the direction. The Prime Minister should be going to the office of the Vice Minister, Hua Jinyang." Li Tianlan lowered his head, and his eyes suddenly became a little fierce. Li Huaqing narrowed his eyes. He nodded and said, I see. You informed the canteen to make a few dishes for dinner. Ma Si nodded and closed the door again. At the same time, in the hidden dragon sea, Chen Fangqing came to the door of the winter pavilion with a big box full of documents. The winter pavilion was the residence and office of Hua Zhirong, the vice minister of Zhongzhou state. Perhaps for the sake of convenient communication, it was very close to the Green Flower Hall where Chen Fangqing lived. When Chen Fangqing walked over, he just paused outside the door and then walked straight in. Prime Minister. The secretary, who had obviously noticed Chen Fangqing, stood up and smiled respectfully. Chen Fangqing nodded and asked directly, Is Comrade Jingyang here? The secretary would have noticed him on his way here. In the past, Hua Jingyang should have come out to greet him. But now, Chen Fangqing laughed at himself and didn't bother to care about it. But what he didn't expect was the secretary's answer. The secretary's voice was still respectful, with an obvious apology. Prime Minister, I'm sorry. Vice Minister Hua is not feeling well today. He went to the backyard to sleep an hour ago. Chen Fangqing was obviously stunned for a moment. He looked at the door behind the secretary. A little light came through the crack in the door. It was quiet inside the door. Chen Fangqing was silent for a long time. There was obviously someone in the office behind the secretary. This was the office of the vice minister of Zhongzhou state. If he was not inside, who could go in? Who dared to go in? And the secretary was sitting here at this time. If Hua Jingyang was already resting, why was he sitting here? Everyone could figure out what was going on, and they would also understand Hua Jingyang's subtext. That was, he didn't want to see him. The reason for the other party's refusal was not clever, but it was very clear. Chen Fangqing spoke slowly and emphasized again, it's a very important matter. I'm sorry, Prime Minister. Vice Minister Hua is really not feeling well today. How about another day? The apology on the secretary's face became more obvious. Chen Fangqing glanced at the closed door again, nodded, and said, Got it. Then he turned and left the winter pavilion without looking back. The secretary saw him out and watched his figure go away in the night and snow. He took out his mobile phone and made a call, seemingly to call the driver. The secretary let out a sigh of relief, turned back, and gently pushed the office door open. Vice Minister, the Prime Minister has left. The secretary said softly. Hua Jingyang stood in the office and was practicing calligraphy. When he heard the words, he paused for a moment. A drop of ink fell from the tip of the brush onto the snow-white rice paper, leaving a dark stain. I see. The brush fell. Hua Jingyang said calmly. Chen Fangqing walked back to Qinghua Hall again. The black Hongqi car was parked in front of the door. The driver stood in front of the door, watched Chen Fangqing come over with a box, and gently opened the door for him. Chen Fangqing sat in the car, patted the box, and closed his eyes. Prime Minister, where to? The driver asked as he started the car. After a moment of silence, Chen Fangqing said lightly, to Building 11 of Dragon Lake Park. Building 11 of Dragon Lake Park. The driver was obviously stunned for a moment. He seemed to be a little suspicious and repeated again, Building 11? Chen Fangqing closed his eyes and said softly, Yes. Chapter 1076. The black-red flag slowly drove out of the hidden dragon sea in the night. Yuzhou City was brightly lit. The gorgeous light shone in the closed car, which was a little hazy and psychedelic. The driver, Old Gao, drove the car steadily. From time to time, he quickly glanced at Chen Fangqing, who was sitting in the back row with his eyes closed. Old Gao's heart was in turmoil. He was a little uneasy, a little excited, and a little hesitant. No matter what, the chauffeur of the leader could see the situation better than most people. Who the leader was talking to, how the mood was after the conversation, and even what they were talking about. From these, it was easy for the chauffeur to infer some things and roughly understand the invisible but distinct barriers between the major groups. Chen Fangqing was in a very difficult situation these days. Old Gao saw all of this. It was not easy to be a leader, and all aspects would also affect the people around him. Old Gao also suffered a lot during this time. Because of this, he felt a little incredible about the destination of Chen Fangqing's trip. Building number 11 in Dragon Lake Park. In Old Gao's mind, Chen Fangqing might go anywhere now, but he would not go to building number 11 in any case, and he should not go there. Dragon Lake Park was not too far from the hidden Dragon Sea, and it was not open to the public. In the huge park, dozens of villas were sporadically dotted among the green mountains and rivers. They were the residences specially built by Zhengzhou State for the sitting MPs, retired MPs, state advisors, and other leaders of Zhengzhou State. Building number 11 was Villa number 11. The owner of this place was not close to Chen Fangqing at all. In the current situation, he could even be said to be an enemy. This was the residence of Wu Jingmin, a member of Zhengzhou State and the deputy prime minister of the cabinet. It was said that he was the firmest supporter of the young emperor of Tiannan. Many policies implemented in recent years were obviously taken care of Tiannan. Most of the support in funds and resources was handled by him. It was said that the young emperor of Tiannan had already established a new group. After the election, Wu Jingmin, who should have retired due to his age, would continue to wield even more power. He might even become a director. If that was the case, he would become the supreme leader and flag-bearer of the new group. In any case, the leader sitting in the back row would not be a friend of Wu Jingmin. What is the prime minister doing here so late? Old Gao thought silently. The red flag passed through the brilliant lights and gradually approached the heavily guarded Dragon Lake Park. After passing the checkpoint and showing their identification, the car went up the winding and smooth road. In the back of the car, Chen Fangqing opened his eyes and wound down the window. The chilly night wind poured into the car, blowing up Chen Fangqing's grizzled hair. The persistent headache began to subside, and his consciousness also became clearer. He silently thought about this person, and the memories in his mind were more than most of the others. Scenes after scenes flashed through his mind. Chen Fangqing grabbed the box beside him and took a deep breath. The headache became more and more intense. However, he had completely calmed down. The car stopped in front of Villa 11. The villa was lit up. Wu Jingmin, who was older than Chen Fangqing but looked more energetic, was already standing at the door, welcoming them with a smile. The most praiseworthy thing about Wu Jingmin was that he abided by the rules, but it was also the most troublesome thing about him. The Li family had been desolate for more than 20 years, and he had defended Xianxia alone until Li Tianlan appeared. Xianxia could be regarded as the base camp of the Li family. Such persistence had an absolute relationship with his absolutely stable style of doing things and excellent personal integrity. For so many years, Wu Jingmin was either radical or conservative, strong or conciliatory. Every time, he was reasonable and well-founded. He and Li Tianlan were of different ages and styles of doing things. Li Tianlan could point to Chen Fangqing and ask him what he was, which was young and aggressive. However, no matter what kind of opponent Wu Jingmin faced, he would correct his attitude and be calm. The car stopped beside the street lamp in front of the door. Wu Jingmin, who was ready to rest, had changed his clothes. He took the initiative to take 2 steps and shook hands with Chen Fangqing, who got out of the car. There was no contempt or sarcasm in his smile, and he said in a gentle voice, "Hello, Prime Minister." Chen Fangqing shook Wu Jingmin's hand hard and did not respond to the somewhat condescending comrade Wu Jingmin. He looked at the old man in front of him who was 6 years older than him, and his eyes were a little dazed. Perhaps there was no hope of looking forward, so at this moment his mind was flashing with all kinds of past. "Speaker Wu, you are old." Chen Fangqing said softly and then smiled. "I am also old." Wu Jingmin was stunned. Mayor Wu, this title with the power of time seemed to pull him back to decades ago. Yes, decades ago, when Wu Jingmin had just emerged, he used to be the mayor of a city in Qinzhou province, and at that time, Chen Fangqing was the deputy mayor of that city. To a certain extent, many years ago, the two of them had worked together. At that time, Chen Fangqing was still Wu Jingmin's direct subordinate. Just like now, the two of them were both in the cabinet, but their positions had been swapped, and Chen Fangqing was walking in front. Wu Jingmin's eyes were obviously filled with memories. Decades ago, about 40 years ago, although he had already emerged at that time, he had not really received the attention of the Southeast group. At that time, Chen Fangqing did not have any obvious traces of the group. At that time, it was the time when Wu Jingmin was in high spirits. Chen Fangqing was young, capable, bold, far-sighted, and down-to-earth in doing things. Soon, he attracted Wu Jingmin's attention, and he was recommended to the provincial council, and he was appointed as the deputy mayor of that city. At that time, the two of them could be said to work together extremely well. However, in private, the two of them were obviously not slick people, so their personal relationship was not good. With the assistance of Chen Fangqing, Wu Jingmin's work was very smooth. He sorted out the work of the municipal government, and then began the bold construction reform. It was from that time that Wu Jingmin officially came into the sight of the Southeast group. Shortly after Li Honghe came down for an inspection, Wu Jingmin became the speaker from the mayor, and Chen Fangqing directly became the mayor from the deputy mayor of the council. The usual phenomenon that the first and second leaders had their own thoughts did not happen. The two of them still worked together and shone in their respective fields. At that time, Qinzhou province was different from what it was now. Today, Qinzhou was already the backyard of the giant group, but at that time, Qinzhou was in the intertwined situation of the giant group, the Southeast group, and the Prince group. In such a complicated political environment, the rapid development of the small city in Qinzhou attracted the attention of countless people. Wu Jingmin began to become important in the Southeast group. At the same time, many people began to contact Chen Fangqing. People from the Southeast group, the giant group, and the Prince group all contacted him. However, there was an unspoken rule that could not be regarded as a rule. It had always existed in Zhongzhou state, from the country to the provinces, and from the cities and counties. The focus of this election was Wen Siyuan and Hua Jingyang. Hua Jingyang's biggest disadvantage was Li Huaqing. Li Huaqing was the president and came from the academics, so many people did not want to see Hua Jingyang, who also came from the academics, become the prime minister of Zhongzhou state. This was a good thing for the academy, but for others, it was a real scruple. The first and second leaders were completely in the same position and were highly consistent. Most people did not want to see such a strong force. As for each province, except for those like Northeast, Beihai, Jiangxia, Tianfu, and Zhongyuan, which were the backyard of the major groups to cultivate their own talents, in most provinces, the speaker and the governor would not come from the same group. Each of the major groups had their own forces in different provinces. Some groups had a great advantage in terms of power, so that province would become their backyard in the conventional sense. However, there would always be different voices and different standpoints. Other than some core foundational provinces, there was no province that truly only had one kind of power. It was the same for the provinces and the cities and counties. In those days, the three major groups had contact with Chen Fangqing. At that time, the Li family and the Wang family of Beihai were still in the same boat. It was no exaggeration to say that the Southeast group was Chen Fangqing's best choice at that time. Further, the olive branch of the Southeast group was what Chen Fangqing desired the most. But he finally chose the Prince group. The reason? The main reason was for the hidden rule. Or, it was for more than 6 million people in the 3 districts and 11 counties of that city. If he had chosen the Southeast group, then Wu Jingmin and himself, who were also from the Southeast group, would inevitably be transferred away in the near future. Judging from the situation in Qinzhou at that time, those who could go to that city to partner with him or Wu Jingmin did not agree with their idea of developing the city. But the foundation of that city had been laid. The curve of the city finance was like a roller coaster, with big profits and big profits. All kinds of investments bloomed everywhere. At the same time, the various mortgages in the city and the funds raised by the people also reached an extremely terrifying number. That period was the most critical period for that city. Wu Jingmin and Chen Fangqing cooperated best. If either of them were to leave, it would cause turmoil in the situation. If another person who did not agree with their concept of development came, it would affect the whole situation. In the end, there might be unimaginable chaos, which would then lead to an incomparably huge social problem. At that time, the future of that city would be destroyed, and the future of the two would also be destroyed. So Chen Fangqing chose the Prince Group, which was second only to the Southeast Group at that time, and successfully stayed. Such a choice, no matter whether it was right or wrong, at least bought nearly 4 years for him and Wu Jingmin. In those 4 years, that city quickly established everything and walked on the most correct path. 4 years later, Wu Jingmin was transferred from Qinzhou to Minnan. In the following years, Chen Fangqing was transferred from Qinzhou to Tianfu. Then, Wu Jingmin went from Minnan to Xianxia, and Chen Fangqing went from Tianfu to the southwest. The two dazzling stars of that era gradually drifted away and never worked together again. Wu Jingmin rose from Xianxia and became the speaker of Xianxia. The Li family collapsed, and he was firmly fixed on the position of the speaker of Xianxia. For decades, he did not advance or retreat, and he was as stable as a rock. Chen Fangqing rushed out of Tiannan, entered Yuzhou, entered the cabinet, and became the prime minister. The different trajectories were getting farther and farther away, and the tacit understanding between the two seemed to be fading. However, the city that they had once developed reasonably was left behind. The city located in the hinterland of Qinchuan, 800 miles away, was thriving. The two silently watched its development get better and better. The city, known as the first capital in the world, gradually became the new provincial capital of Qinzhou and a dazzling pearl in the central area of Zhongzhou State, blooming the light that the two of them had condensed for several years. That was an extremely beautiful memory. Wu Jingmin was silent for a long time before he patted Chen Fangqing's arm hard and said with some emotion, "Yes, I'm old, and my hair is white." At this moment, looking at the prime minister who was at the end of his rope, he was reminded of the young man who excitedly talked about the country with him decades ago. He was full of energy, high-spirited, and ambitious as he planned the city. The past was like smoke, vivid in his mind. Once again, he thought of the question that he had thought about countless times. If Chen Fangqing had chosen the Southeast Group, with his ability, he would have been highly valued by Li Honghe. If Chen Fangqing had chosen the Southeast Group, in that era, the Li family would have had two incomparably brilliant stars. The Li family's Gemini stars. Maybe the treason case would not have happened. Maybe, there were too many maybes, too many ifs. But they all became the reality. There were no ifs. No one would have thought that the choice back then would bring Chen Fangqing to the present situation. Similarly, no one would have thought that when Chen Fangqing, who had surpassed the old leader one step ahead, was in a hopeless situation, his old leader came back from the dead and returned to the power center, and was still thriving. Life was like a drama, with ups and downs. Every rise and fall was fate. Wu Jingmin smiled and reached out sideways. "Please come in." Chen Fangqing's eyes seemed to become warm quietly. He held the suitcase tightly in one hand and walked into the villa with Wu Jingmin. Wu Jingmin made a pot of Yuzhou-scented tea for him, and the fragrance was overflowing. He sat opposite Chen Fangqing, pushed the cigarette in front of him to him, and said with a smile, "Catching up." Naturally, casually, and straightforwardly. Everything felt like it was yesterday. The tacit understanding that they thought had faded did not fade, but the two of them deliberately hid it. Now, with the change of mentality, everything Wu Jingmin did was no different from what he did decades ago. In the living room, the figures of the two old men seemed to go back in time and return to the office decades ago, which was far less luxurious than it was now. Chen Fangqing's headache seemed to have eased a lot. He smiled, took out a cigarette, lit it, and whispered, "Business." Wu Jingmin nodded and continued to wait for Chen Fangqing to speak. Chen Fangqing opened the suitcase. Inside the box were stacks upon stacks of documents. "I've sorted them out in recent years." Chen Fangqing smiled and said, "I've put forward some bills at the cabinet meeting." "Well, you should know about them in the past 2 years." Chen Fangqing said with a wider smile. This might be the reason why he came here without hesitation after not seeing Hua Ziyang. Wu Jingmin had been in the cabinet for more than 2 years. Others might not have noticed it, but Chen Fangqing remembered it clearly. Because of their different positions, the contradiction between the two would become very sharp. However, Wu Jingmin had never opposed the proposals that Chen Fangqing put forward at the cabinet meeting. Instead, he would try his best to support them. The development of the two was really consistent to some extent. I still remember. Wu Jingmin nodded and said, in fact, even if the bill was rejected, I don't think you're wrong. It's just that the time is not right. It takes time. Chen Fangqing said softly, sometimes, I'm a little impatient. 10,000 years is too long. Seize every minute. Wu Jingmin said with a smile. Chen Fangqing raised the corner of his mouth in self-mockery and said with some regret, unfortunately, I don't have time. So I brought all these here today, and I can only ask you to help me. Wu Jingmin did not speak. He knew that Chen Fangqing did not mean to ask him to plead for Li Tianlan, and it was impossible for Wu Jingmin to plead for Chen Fangqing. In fact, if he spoke, Li Tianlan might be unhappy, but he would give Wu Jingmin face after all. But the biggest degree of this face was to spare Chen Fangqing's life. This life meant nothing to Chen Fangqing now. These are some proposals about new energy. This is about the reform of the cabinet system. The reform of education and healthcare. This is a detailed plan for the real estate industry. These are some measures to reduce the burden on farmers. Chen Fangqing took out one document after another and placed them in front of Wu Jingmin like a hill. Many of the documents were never taken out by Chen Fangqing at the cabinet meeting, but they were extremely precious. They were the condensation of all his wisdom and efforts. Chen Fangqing introduced them tirelessly. Time gradually passed in his voice. The night was getting darker. Wu Jingmin was in high spirits. Chen Fangqing's voice was calm and peaceful, with trust. He knew Wu Jingmin. Maybe it was Wu Jingmin decades ago. But he believed that there were always some characteristics that time could not wash away. He could work hard for the Li family for decades. Then he could also do his best for Zhongzhou state. It was not until nearly 4 o'clock in the night that Chen Fangqing finished saying everything he wanted to say. He put all the materials back into the box, took away 2 proposals that were really not very mature, and then handed the whole box to Wu Jingmin. Wu Jingmin took it with both hands with a solemn face. The 2 of them shook hands tightly. Want to have some supper? Wu Jingmin smiled and looked at his watch again. It should be breakfast now. Forget it. Chen Fangqing shook his head. I'll go back now. I'll go around the Hidden Dragon Sea and eat something by the way. I like the tofu pudding in the Hidden Dragon Sea. It's better than here. Wu Jingmin laughed and looked at Chen Fangqing. He saw relaxation and endless calmness in his eyes. Until now, I can say that I have really done everything I can for Zhongzhou state. Chen Fangqing laughed. Whether it's merits or demerits, let the later generations judge. He let go of Wu Jingmin's palm. Let's go. You don't have to see me off. Wu Jingmin insisted on seeing him out of the villa. Chen Fangqing walked to his car in the night without looking back. He casually waved his hand behind him and then walked forward calmly. He walked to his own doomsday. Chapter 1077. It was early morning in the Hidden Dragon Sea, and everything was quiet. When the car passed the first checkpoint in the Hidden Dragon Sea, snowflakes fell over Yuzhou again. The snowflakes were like stars, getting bigger and bigger. When the car officially entered the gate of the Hidden Dragon Sea, there was a faint layer of white on the main road that had been cleaned. His head began to hurt again. Chen Fangqing rubbed his forehead hard, and his body trembled a little. He had had a headache for several years. The most advice his private doctor gave him was that he should rest more, pay attention to his diet and lifestyle, and smoke less. However, in his position, he couldn't do these seemingly reasonable and common suggestions at all. As the business became more and more heavy recently, he began to take painkillers. However, the pain kept getting worse, and it seemed that even painkillers had lost their effect. Stop the car. Chen Fangqing ordered in a low voice. The black-red flag stopped on the main road of the Hidden Dragon Sea, which was covered with snow. Chen Fangqing opened the door. The cold wind blew in, and his headache was slightly relieved. He felt much better. Xiao Gao, thank you for your hard work tonight. Chen Fangqing glanced at the driver. Go back. I'll take a walk outside and wake up. His voice was a little weak. The driver, Old Gao, glanced at him worriedly. Chen Fangqing got out of the car and waved at Old Gao again. He was very persistent. Old Gao nodded and didn't say anything. The red flag slowly moved away from Chen Fangqing. The boundless cold and the messy snow completely surrounded Chen Fangqing. In the winter morning of Yuzhou, it was very late. As the car left, there were only cold street lights and flying snow in front of Chen Fangqing. He stood in the faint light for a long time before he walked slowly on the snow, looking a little bleak and lonely. Chen Fangqing wandered aimlessly. Chen Fangqing chatted with Wu Jingmin for nearly a night and talked about a lot of things. He talked about the macroscopic general direction, the subtle regulation, and various fields of Zhongzhou State. Chen Fangqing told him everything he knew. The fields he thought about were the fields that Zhongzhou State needed to change at present. In other words, after he handed those things over to Wu Jingmin, some of them would soon come in handy. There were a few new policies that needed to be implemented urgently. However, the situation before the election was chaotic, and Chen Fangqing was in an extremely passive situation, so he had no choice but to suppress it. Now that those things were handed over to Wu Jingmin, he believed that Wu Jingmin would be able to use them very soon. His position was basically set in stone, and there was not much competitive pressure. Naturally, no one would deliberately become enemies with him. There was no need to wait for the election. At the next cabinet meeting, he would have a high chance of passing if he proposed it. By the time those policies were truly effective, Chen Fangqing would have long been deliberately forgotten. Those things would naturally become Wu Jingmin's resources and achievements, and then reputation. He originally planned to give this reputation to Hua Jingyang to help him, but now Chen Fangqing shook his head. His heart seemed to have truly relaxed. The cold wind whistled around him, and the speed at which his headache subsided was increasing. All the burdens had been completely removed overnight. He began to face his own fate with an incomparably calm attitude, facing his own life and death. Really, there was nothing else that he needed to do. He told himself this with certainty. In the last years of his political life, this chapter is not over, please turn the page. He mobilized countless resources and paid most of the chips to do one more thing for Zhongzhou State, but he reaped an extremely tragic failure. He was unwilling, confused, disappointed, angry, and even afraid. But everything was a foregone conclusion. He handed over the future plan of Zhongzhou State, which was his last political wealth. The coordination between the academics and the prince group in the future would mainly be done by Guo Wenyin. The only thing he needed to do was to find a suitable opportunity to express his attitude in the next few days. It was an attitude that was better than silence, but it wasn't that much better. It was dispensable. Next, it was time for him to retire early. Retirement, then waiting for the butcher's knife of Emperor Dong's palace, and then death. Chen Fangqing walked silently in the Hidden Dragon Sea at night, bathed in the wind and snow. This place was called Hidden Dragon Sea. However, the so-called Hidden Dragon Sea and Dragon Sea were just a lake. The lake water had been frozen in the winter of Yuzhou province and was covered with snow, which looked as soft as a piece of snow-white silk. Most of the trees around the lake had withered, and the dry branches were swaying in the wind and snow. The still lush pines and cypresses were covered with snow, which looked a little unreal. Chen Fangqing walked almost all over the Hidden Dragon Sea along the shore of the lake. The conference room, the big conference room, the golden autumn garden, the cold winter pavilion, the purple light platform. For 10 years, to be exact, 15 years, every inch of land here had his memories. Chen Fangqing walked very slowly, as if he was carefully measuring the power center of Zhongzhou State. His footsteps crunched in the thicker and thicker snow. His eyes were calm, with a touch of faint but extremely dignified affection. The footprints on the shore of the lake were connected. The sky of Yuzhou was still dark. The cold lights were shining, and the world was silent. Chen Fangqing's figure walked into the small restaurant that was open 24 hours a day in the Hidden Dragon Sea. His face was a little pale because of walking outside for a long time. Sitting in the chair, he trembled slightly. It took him 3 or 4 minutes to dispel the chill on his body. "Good morning, Prime Minister." The young staff trotted over with real respect and said with a smile, "What would you like to eat? Still the same?" Chen Fangqing replied with a and said with a smile, "One more." The Prime Minister is hungry. Please wait a moment. The staff nodded with a smile and walked into the backstage. In the face of the Prime Minister of Zhongzhou State, he was obviously not very formal. In fact, outside of work, his character had always been extremely gentle. Among all the directors of Zhongzhou State, those who came to the restaurant in the middle of the night or came to the restaurant to order food were basically Chen Fangqing or the people in Chen Fangqing's office. Gradually, the night staff in the restaurant might be a small group of people who were most familiar with him except for the secretary. The tofu pudding and youtiao were soon served. Facing the breakfast that he had not been tired of for many years, Chen Fangqing didn't know why he suddenly felt that this meal was particularly delicious. His headache seemed to be completely relieved when he ate. It might also be the painkillers played a role. Chen Fangqing had a good appetite. After drinking 2 bowls of tofu pudding and eating 3 youtiao, he stood up contentedly and wrapped the remaining youtiao in a paper bag. He planned to eat it casually after getting up at noon. After saying goodbye to the staff, Chen Fangqing slowly walked out of the restaurant with the youtiao in the paper bag. The increasing snowstorm quickly drowned Chen Fangqing's figure. In the incomparably wide field of view of the hidden Dragon Sea, the lights were cold, the wind and snow were all over the sky. This chapter is not over, please turn the page. Stumbling. After seeing them off, Li Huaqing, who had not slept all night, stood in front of his window and quietly looked at the extremely blurred figure in the wind and snow. There was no light in the warm room. His body was motionless, like a statue standing in front of the window. The room was quiet, until Li Huaqing took the initiative to break the silence. The last time I saw a similar figure was more than 20 years ago, also in this place, also in a snowstorm, also in the early morning. Li Huaqing suddenly said, "More than 20 years ago?" Beside Li Huaqing stood a man who looked less than 40 years old, between a young man and a middle-aged man. His appearance was blurred in the darkness, but his posture was extremely straight. He was also looking at the figure, then quickly glanced at Li Huaqing and said with a smile, "Dad, more than 20 years ago, you were still in Liaodong, weren't you?" Li Huaqing also smiled and looked at his son. His son was called Li Xiuqi. He did not engage in politics, but was a major general in the Zhongzhou Navy. It was rare for him to have a holiday. Soon after Li Tianlan left, he returned to the hidden Dragon Sea. The father and son talked all night and happened to see Chen Fangqing at this time. Maybe it's a coincidence. Li Huaqing whispered, "More than 20 years ago, I was the deputy governor of Liaodong. At that time, I had a meeting in Yuzhou. Prime Minister Chen was very interested in some of my views and asked me to stay in the hidden Dragon Sea to talk all night. About this time, I saw the picture of Senior Li leaving the hidden Dragon Sea in Qinghua Hall. I still remember that at that time, Chen bowed deeply to Senior Li's back, and then he told me that an era was over." Li Xiuqi was in a daze. He knew who the Chen Xiang his father was talking about was. Although the old man was from the Southeast group, to a certain extent, Li Huaqing was indebted to him. Before Chen Xiang died, Li Huaqing would basically visit him on New Year's Eve, even after he became the president. And Senior Li, he was probably Li Honghe, the war god of Zhongzhou State more than 20 years ago. In the past 15 years, from the vice president to the president, I've seen a lot of people leave and seen a lot of people's backs. Some were lonely, some were reluctant, some were regretful, some were guilty, some were relaxed. Li Huaqing shook his head. But the thing that left the deepest impression on me was still old Li's back that year. The unprecedented failure that caught him off guard, the end of the road, the end of the road. He had some regrets, but he still had the freedom to let go of everything. There was an obvious light of memory in his eyes. That back, I want to call it wisdom. Li Huaqing laughed at himself and said, "I thought I couldn't see it, but today, Chen Fangqing's back became more and more blurred in the wind and snow. I saw it again," Li Huaqing murmured to himself. Li Xiuqi hesitated and whispered, "I heard that the Prime Minister had the opportunity to join the Southeast group, and even Senior Li met the Prime Minister in person. How can there be so many if?" Li Huaqing shook his head slightly. He and Wu Jingmin didn't let Qinzhou down. It sounded like half a sentence, but it was the most complete sentence, because there was no need to say the second half of the sentence. Chen Fangqing's back completely disappeared from sight. Li Huaqing looked at his watch, walked behind his desk, picked up the phone, and dialed Hua Xingyang's number. While waiting for the phone to be connected, he looked at the wind and snow sweeping the world outside the window again and whispered, "It's all over." End of this chapter. Chapter 1078. By the time Hua Xingyang arrived at the Golden Autumn Pavilion, there was already a faint light in the sky. He carried 2 portions of breakfast, shook off the snow on his body, and laughed heartily. "President, these are freshly cooked buns. Do you want to try them?" Li Huaqing smiled and nodded. He put down the internal reference document in his hand and went to the dining room. Hua Xiang hurriedly poured some vinegar and began to make soup. His movements were natural. Li Huaqing smiled as he watched Hua Xingyang busy himself. "Are you in a good mood?" "I like snow." Hua Xingyang laughed and said, "Every time it snows, it reminds me of my hometown. I haven't been back for many years. Some time ago, someone from my hometown came to visit me and gave me 2 ginseng. I made 2 bottles of wine. I'll bring you a bottle later." Li Huaqing nodded and took a bite of the bun. It was different from Chen Fangqing and Guo Wentian of the Prince Group. He was also different from Wan Qingyun and Ji Wenzhang of the Southeast Group. The relationship between Li Huaqing and Hua Xingyang was even different from that between Dongqing Wudi and Zhou Mulin in the Giant Group. In front of Li Huaqing, Zhuang Huayang's carefree attitude always carried a clear hint of respect and deference, which included deep gratitude, admiration, awe, and intimacy. The leaders of the other corporations might have different positions, but they treated each other equally. Only Hua Xingyang was like a subordinate in front of Li Huaqing. In fact, the 2 of them had a clear relationship of superior and subordinate in their political careers. When Li Huaqing was the governor of Liaodong, Hua Xingyang was the deputy governor. When Li Huaqing was the speaker of Liaodong, Hua Xingyang was the deputy speaker. After entering Yuzhou, Li Huaqing was the vice president, and Hua Xingyang was transferred to the Ministry of Personnel as the second leader. 5 years later, Li Huaqing successfully ascended to the top, and Hua Xingyang entered the parliament and became the minister of the Ministry of Personnel of Zhongzhou State. When Li Huaqing was re-elected for the second time, Hua Xingyang entered the cabinet and became the second prime minister until now. The academics was the youngest group in Zhongzhou State except for the Special Warfare Group. Unlike the Special Warfare Group, which had an inherently flawed structure, their structure was extremely rigorous and complete. They grew from a large regional group to a ruling group that influenced the entire Zhongzhou state. Any word could be used without reservation to describe Li Huaqing, and it was no exaggeration at all. His contributions were undeniable, and he was a man of great talent and bold vision. Li Huaqing completely deserved such an evaluation. The development trajectory of the academic faction was almost the same as Li Huaqing's rise. The entire academic faction was almost carried on his shoulders by his own strength and continued to grow. His ideals influenced everyone in the academics, which made the entire academics the most energetic group among the 6 major groups. It was full of vitality. However, the short rise time also meant that the academics had shortcomings in all aspects. For example, it did not have a close enough relationship with many retired but influential old people, which was a huge disadvantage that the academics had not been able to reverse so far. Another example was that there was not enough talent reserve in too short a time, let alone a perfect promotion framework, which the academics had not completely perfected so far. When the academics transferred by Qingqian, who was born in the Giant Group, to its backyard, Liaodong, to serve as the speaker, it was a second move that Li Huaqing planned to perfect the promotion framework of the academics. Bai Qingqian had outstanding ability and connections, and there was no need to doubt the strength of the Giant Group. The 2 groups could cooperate at the beginning, and the academics just wanted to use Bai Qingqian to get the support of the Giant Group. In their original plan, in this election, they wanted to push Bai Qingqian to the position of a member of Parliament of Zhongzhou State and promote in Liaodong Province. In the next few years, they would work hard to stabilize this concept, so that Liaodong could get a political status similar to Wuyue, Nanyue, Beijiang, or Huading, the north, the southwest, and Yuzhou. Simply put, it was to make it a practice for the speaker of Liaodong to enter the parliament, so as to completely perfect their promotion framework. This was the goal that any group had to work hard to perfect. The so-called promotion framework, to put it bluntly, was a stable internal promotion path from an ordinary staff member to a member of parliament of Zhongzhou state. This also guaranteed that in every election, at least one member of the group would be in their own hands. His position was completely in the hands of the group, that was, it was decided internally, and other groups could not take action. Only by establishing this position could the people in this position be guaranteed to be promoted when the group encountered a major crisis, and then ensure that the voice of the group in the top class of Zhongzhou state could be heard by others. Among the 6, only the academics did not have such a position at present. The Prince Group's southwest city was held by a member of parliament, and other groups could not intervene. In addition to the southwest, the Prince Group also owned Beijiang. The southeast group was even more excessive before. It held Beihai, Huding, and Wuxia, and the leaders of these 3 places were bound to be members of parliament. Wuxia had fallen more than a decade ago, and Wuxia was now controlled by Wang Qinglei. Even so, Beihai still had Beihai province as the top of its promotion framework. The declining North Group also had Northern City in its hands. The giant group had Yuzhou and several fixed positions in the army headquarters. Even the new group had already locked in Nanyue. Only the academics' efforts in this regard in recent years had hit a wall everywhere. All the major groups were quietly squeezing the development space of the academics. Li Huaqing's initial goal was Jiangshan and Beijiang province, which seemed to be in harmony with the Prince Group but was actually alienated. However, Jiangshan's mind was deep and unpredictable, and he had never expressed his position directly. After a few years, the academics set their eyes on Tibet. However, the situation in Tibet was complicated, and it was also difficult to be the backyard of the academics for a long time. After 10 years of games, the academics could only choose the place where it started, Liang. 5 years ago, Bai Qingxian was transferred to Liaodong, and then the council made a lot of big moves that were beneficial to Liaodong. A large amount of funds poured into the northeast, and Liaodong changed with each passing day. If it were not for the sudden rise of the new group, Bai Qingxian was likely to be elected as a member of parliament of Zhongzhou state in this election, and the promotion framework of the academics would have taken shape. And it would take the following time to stabilize. However, Li Tianlan and Emperor Dong's palace broke the plan of the academics, and Li Huaqing's plan was undoubtedly ruined again. Fortunately, he would continue to be re-elected after this election, and there were still 5 years to operate. Otherwise, once he retired, although Hua Xingyang was still in power, it was really difficult for him to come up with a good solution in 5 years. At that time, the future of the academics was really a little worrying. All kinds of disadvantages always gave the emerging group the impression that although the academics was very powerful, it always lacked something. Until now, their structure was not perfect, and it could be imagined how difficult it was for Li Huaqing to rise in the beginning. Under such circumstances, it could be said that Hua Xingyang was forced by Li Huaqing to make an exception and promote him. For Hua Xingyang himself, Li Huaqing had an incomparable position in his heart. He was like a brother, a mentor, a guide, and even a father-like role. Although the age difference between the two was less than 10 years. From the original Liaodong to the current Hidden Dragon Sea, no matter where Hua Xingyang was, he always regarded Li Huaqing as the most respected leader. He regarded Li Huaqing as the most respectable leader, and he was always respectful. Last night, the Prime Minister talked to me about his idea. Li Huaqing ate a bun and said slowly, for him, the situation is now out of control, and he is ready to accept the current situation. Hua Xingyang looked at Li Huaqing in surprise. Accept the current situation? He was not familiar with Li Tianlan, but now the whole world knew Li Tianlan's character. How sensitive the election of Zhongzhou state was, and how crucial the emergence of the new group was, had now become the focus of attention of all countries in the world. Under such circumstances, Chen Fangqing was ready to accept the situation, which meant that he accepted death, and it was not only his death. Li Huaqing saw Hua Xingyang's surprised look, and he was also a little surprised. You don't know? Hua Xingyang shook his head in confusion and said with a smile, although the Prime Minister doesn't have many chances now, there is always room for struggle. At the very least, he should be able to negotiate terms. Judging from his past behavior, he shouldn't give up so easily. Simple giving up, Li Huaqing murmured to himself, and then shook his head. It's not simple at all. He held the bun, and it was a little tasteless. From a personal point of view, Chen Fangqing did have the possibility to struggle, but from the overall situation, accepting this outcome was the most stable way. Chen Fangqing's giving up was not simple, not at all. He thought silently and suddenly asked, "Didn't he tell you his plan last night? He and Guo Wenian have reached a consensus, and the Prince Group has decided to fully support you in controlling the cabinet. What did you talk about last night?" Hua Xingyang's hand holding the soybean milk suddenly froze in place. His expression completely froze in an instant. His thoughts seemed to go back to a few hours ago. At that time, he was practicing handwriting in his office. And Chen Fangqing was standing outside, wanting to meet him. How did he get the secretary to respond? There was a clear trace of embarrassment on Hua Xingyang's face. He finally realized that something was wrong. What's wrong? Li Huaqing looked at him and asked. He received the news last night that Chen Fangqing went to see Hua Xingyang, but at that time, Li Tianlan and Qin Weibai were still there. Li Huaqing had no time to care about the conversation over there and subconsciously ignored the question. Didn't he go to see you last night? What did you talk about? Li Huaqing asked again. Hua Xingyang opened his mouth and finally couldn't help but smile bitterly. I didn't see him last night. Silence. Li Huaqing was completely silent. He looked at Hua Xingyang and didn't speak for a long time. He knew what kind of person Hua Xingyang was, so he didn't need to ask the reason to know why Hua Xingyang didn't want to see him. Chen Fangqing didn't appear in the Hidden Dragon Sea until morning, which meant that after not seeing Hua Xingyang, Chen Fangqing went to see someone else. Who? Who else could he find? The cabinet was now the top structure, with one prime minister, one deputy prime minister, and 3 deputy prime ministers. After this election, Chen Fangqing would not stay, and 2 of the 3 deputy prime ministers would also retire. Hua Xingyang didn't see Chen Fangqing, so there was only one person Chen Fangqing had to see. Deputy Prime Minister Wu Jingmin. Li Huaqing put down the steamed bun in his hand and said softly, "Did he go to Jingmin's place last night?" Hua Xingyang also thought of this problem. His face changed and he looked a little embarrassed. "Xingyang, don't be silly." Li Huaqing shook his head in disappointment. "No matter what, there will always be a boundary between you and him, but why?" He shook his head halfway and said, "What are you worried about?" Hua Xingyang became more and more embarrassed, and he didn't say anything. After a long silence, his face suddenly changed slightly, and he said softly, "President, he went to see Deputy Prime Minister Wu Jingmin." "Is it?" Li Huaqing shook his head slightly. "Don't worry about this. He's a little old. In this election, he already has the support of the new group, so he won't be a threat to you. The Prime Minister won't choose to support him, and he doesn't have that position. However, I believe that since they have met, there must be some meaning to this meeting. I'm not worried about Deputy Prime Minister Wu," Hua Xingyang said with a wry smile. Li Huaqing still looked calm, and he said quietly, "If he chooses to support Wen Siyuan, then he should go to Wang Qingyun, Ji Wenzhang, or Yi Dongxing. He shouldn't go to Wu Jingmin." Hua Xingyang thought about it, and his face softened a little. He took a sip of soy milk, hesitated, and said softly, "Should I go to visit him now?" Li Huaqing glanced at him and nodded. "You have to go, but now," he shook his head. "He should be resting now. You can go and have a look in the afternoon. You don't have to explain anything, just go there." Hua Xingyang was a little relieved, and he nodded with a smile. In the blue flower hall that the 2 of them couldn't see, Chen Fangqing didn't rest, but he didn't work either. He didn't return to his office. Instead, he went to the backyard of the blue flower hall and sat down on his bed. He just sat there, silent, and through the opened curtains, he stared blankly at the hazy light outside the window. He began to recall his life, which had lasted for 71 years. He was born in a family that wasn't very prominent. He was from the north, but he grew up in the south. When he was born, his father was the deputy director of a small county in the south. It wasn't a big position, but he still had some power in his hands. Therefore, Chen Fangqing's childhood was very stable. He didn't wander from place to place, had no hardships, and had never been bullied. When he was a teenager, his father, who was very ambitious but also tried his best to protect the family, became the director of that small county. His rank was from the deputy section to the deputy director. Chen Fangqing walked out of the county and was admitted to the best middle school in their city with his own grades. At that time and age, a father of a deputy county was obviously not a status worth showing off in the eyes of an inexperienced teenager. Chen Fangqing didn't show off, nor did he seem to be rebellious. Until now, he still felt that he was most fortunate to have met the best and most understanding teachers in middle school, so that he always had excellent grades in the 3 years of middle school. When he was in high school, Chen Fangqing's father was transferred from the county to the city as the deputy mayor and barely became a director of the city. It seemed like a promotion, but in fact, it was the result of a compromise after losing the competition. Chen Fangqing was admitted to the best high school in their province and left the city. His parents took out all their savings and bought a house in that city, which was ridiculously expensive because of education. His mother also moved there just to take care of him in school. He learned to grow. His father's career didn't make any progress in high school. When he graduated from high school, he was admitted to one of the best universities in Zhengzhou at that time with excellent grades. At that time, his father was in a semi-retired state because of a serious liver disease. In his memory, his father's face was weathered and his sideburns were white. He spent most of his life in an official career. Chen Fangqing seemed to have never seen him in high spirits. All he saw was his father's increasingly haggard body and his stooped body. Chen Fangqing was 19 years old that year. On the day he got the university admission notice, Chen Fangqing swore in his heart that after graduation, he would buy a house for his parents in Beihai and let them live in the best environment. He applied to Beihai University in Zhengzhou. Yes, Beihai University. The Wang family of Beihai. Beihai of Beihai Province. Perhaps because of his father's influence, Chen Fangqing had decided on his future path since he was in high school. He wanted to follow his father's path and reach a high position. He wanted to use his own thoughts to change many people and many things. So he chose Beihai University. This was one of the best universities in Zhengzhou State. It might not be as popular as Huaqing University and Yuzhou University, but in the international ranking, Yuzhou University was slightly higher than Beihai University. But in the field of politics, even in the whole Zhengzhou State, no university could beat Beihai University. The philosophy of Beihai University focused on ideas, humanities, and politics. In the more than 500 years since the founding of Zhengzhou State, Beihai University had produced 3 presidents of Zhengzhou State, 11 prime ministers of Zhengzhou State, more than 20 vice ministers of Zhengzhou State, and hundreds of Zhengzhou State parliamentarians. This was a prominent university, a university that influenced the political trend of the whole Zhengzhou State. It was known as the Oxford of the East. The current directors of Zhengzhou State, Dongqing Wudi, Hua Zhengyang, Wan Qingyun, and Bai Qingqian, who was about to become a parliamentarian, all graduated from Beihai University. Many years ago, it was Chen Fangqing's dream school. He entered Beihai as he wished and successfully completed the examination for civil servants of Beihai. The civil servants of Beihai had the best welfare in the world. Every civil servant would be assigned a house of at least 80 square meters in Beihai. But Chen Fangqing finally chose to return to his hometown. His parents refused Chen Fangqing's request to settle down in Beihai. In his father's words, Beihai was good, but home was better. That was the first time he passed by Beihai. He entered the municipal government under his father's recommendation, served as a secretary in the county, went to the provincial government, and then was transferred to Qinzhou, where he met Wu Jingmin. Chen Fangqing was 30 years old that year. At the age of 32, his father died of illness. 3 years later, he was met by Li Honghe in person and sent an invitation. He received invitations from the Giant Group, the Prince Group, and the Southeast Group. In the face of the city he was in charge of, He made a choice that he didn't know if he should regret or not. That was the second time he passed by Beihai. Then, it was a meteoric rise, a meteoric rise. Counselor of Qinzhou Province. Counselor of Talent Province. Deputy Speaker. Governor of Tianfu Province. Mayor of Sinan City. Counselor of Zhongzhou State. Speaker of Sinan City. Deputy Prime Minister of Zhongzhou State. Prime Minister of Zhongzhou State. He sang all the way. But he still didn't feel that kind of high-spirited feeling. Others had seen him working himself to the bone along the way, but he only felt that he was being cautious. He used his power and resources carefully to plan his hometown, the city he was in charge of, the province he controlled, and the country he represented. He was cautious, like walking on thin ice. 71 years of life had come to this day. Scenes flashed in front of him very clearly. Chen Fangqing sat on the bed in a daze, looking out of the window at the sky without the morning sun. The snowflakes all over the sky were dancing in the sky with cold, messy, and beautiful. It was quiet, just like every day in the past many years. He asked about his yesterday. Then he asked about his life. The first question. He felt that he had a clear conscience. He couldn't answer the second question. His heart might be extremely calm, but as he said to Wu Jingmin, whether it was merits or demerits, only future generations could judge. Chen Fangqing stood up slowly. He drew the curtains to cover the flying snow outside the window. He took a shower casually, changed out of his pajamas, slowly lay on the bed, and closed his eyes. The headache had been relieved, and he didn't need to toss and turn. Soon, Chen Fangqing fell asleep. The world in the dream was a sunset. Chen Fangqing, who seemed to be many years younger, felt that he was standing by the lake of the hidden dragon sea and looking at the west. The splendid glow filled the world. The setting sun, which was slowly sinking in the sea of clouds, seemed to be melting bit by bit. The blood of the sun permeated the sea of clouds and the sky, turning it into an incomparably magnificent blood red. The blood red quietly occupied all the fields of vision. Finally, it turned into a pair of eyes. A pair of eyes occupied the sky in the dream and covered the sea of clouds. A pair of eyes that were cold and quiet, but extremely majestic. Those eyes were bright and calm. She looked down at the earth and the hidden dragon sea, reflecting the magnificent scene of the whole world, beautiful like a dream. Looking at those eyes, Chen Fangqing was suddenly filled with fear. His consciousness was torn apart by fear, and his complete consciousness was torn to pieces in an instant. Messy thoughts danced randomly in the dream where darkness and light intertwined. Some of them were warm, some were even scorching. The hot feeling boiled at the highest point of his consciousness. Like a speech without much warmth, it slowly slid down to the unknown. The dream was completely broken. Darkness occupied everything. In the front direction, there was a cliff of tens of thousands of feet and an endless abyss. Chen Fangqing suddenly opened his eyes. Everything familiar in the bedroom did not appear in his sight. There was darkness and nothingness in his sight. The seemingly endless darkness and nothingness filled the bedroom and filled the world. It was quiet and silent. Chen Fangqing opened his eyes quietly. The darkness and nothingness were getting closer and closer to him, like a piece of gauze, covering his body. It was also like the endless floating dust had found a home, accumulating more and more on his body. The darkness fell completely. Chen Fangqing, who was motionless, looked ahead quietly. The darkness that fell completely surged and finally drowned his body in the seemingly endless darkness and nothingness. Until eternity. Chapter 1079. Li Tianlan was still busy when the phone rang in a hurry. In the early morning of Yuzhou, the wind and snow danced wildly. It was as warm as spring in the luxurious suite of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. Spring was in full bloom in every corner. Li Tianlan had been busy, and his day was rich. For some reason, Li Tianlan did not choose to live in the Bai family after coming to Yuzhou. He just called Dongqing Wudi, Bai Zhanfang, and Wu Jingmin respectively, and then booked a room in the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. It was nearly 3 o'clock in the night when he returned to the hotel from the Hidden Dragon Sea. He simply had a midnight snack with Qin Weibai and took a shower. It was nearly 4 o'clock. The battle, or one-sided conquest, began in the bathroom. The water in the bathroom splashed out of the fish tank, and 2 delicate fingerprints were left on the bathroom mirror full of steam. The torn bathrobe was thrown out of the bathroom, and the water drops on the sofa rolled slightly. Li Tianlan gently put on high heels for Qin Weibai. The crystal lamp in the living room was soft and hazy. A faint fragrance floated. In Li Tianlan's sight was the delicate, cold, and perfect face without any flaws. However, this face that he could not get enough of was obviously flushed at this time. Her eyes were blurred, and her red lips were slightly open. With some rapid breathing, there was a kind of almost fatal charm and temptation in the ethereal coldness. It was a kind of enchanting and soul-stirring after the extreme bloom. Her character made her try to maintain a reserved image after she calmed down a little. But when she saw Li Tianlan put on high heels for her with a serious face, her face became redder. Her legs were a little weak, and she was pulled into the bedroom by Li Tianlan. Her soft legs and slender high heels stepped on the floor like clouds and cotton. The bedroom echoed with a soft song that was enough to make anyone crazy. It was soft, sweet, and greasy. The voice was like melted cold water, with a little reserve and delicate, melodious. Li Tianlan felt like a tiger chasing a butterfly, and every time he had a desire to eat the goddess under him. It was no exaggeration to say that Qin Weibai's existence completely satisfied all the best and most exaggerated fantasies of Li Tianlan about the opposite sex. He was so deeply involved that he could not even extricate himself. The big soft bed seemed to be covered with snow. The snow melted on the sheets. Feeling a little uncomfortable, Li Tianlan pulled Qin Weibai out of bed. In the space on the top floor of the tallest building nearby, a streak of sword energy blocked all possible sights from the outside world. Qin Weibai held onto the window, her cheeks burning. Outside the window was the increasingly messy flying snow. It was pure white, like the best human world. From 4 o'clock until 9 o'clock in the morning, Li Tianlan's military exploits were outstanding. When the phone rang, Li Tianlan was in the most critical state and didn't even pay attention to it. When the slightly hoarse but sexier singing stopped, the two casually took a shower and put away the bedsheets. Then, the phone rang again. Li Tianlan, who had made great contributions, felt refreshed. However, he was too lazy to move at the moment. Qin Weibai was held in his arms in an extremely domineering manner, and his palm carelessly played with her hair. Qin Weibai, with her big, misty eyes, gently rubbed against Li Tianlan's chest and murmured something that Li Tianlan could not understand. In the spacious bedroom, the smell of ambiguity mixed with the more intense fragrance of Qin Weibai, forming a smell that gradually made one's heart beat faster. Li Tianlan was tempted again. Qin Weibai shrank in Li Tianlan's arms, covered with the quilt, and pressed one leg on him. Li Tianlan looked down at her and chuckled. "What are you doing?" Qin Weibai looked at him with her watery and bright eyes, and then gave him a hard look. "It's still early," Li Tianlan said. "Gluttony," Qin Weibai said bitterly, "you're so annoying. You only know how to bully me." Qin Weibai's palm slid down. Just as she was about to say something, the phone rang again. Li Tianlan felt a little helpless. He reached out and took the phone, only to find that it was a call from Dongqing Wudi. And the previous 2 calls were from Dongqing Wudi. Li Tianlan's eyes narrowed slightly and he answered the phone. "Tianlan, you just got up?" On the other end of the phone, Dongqing Wudi asked with a smile. His voice sounded relaxed, but in fact, there was a well-hidden heaviness in it. Li Tianlan was a little embarrassed. He was too embarrassed to say that he had not slept all night, and it was even more inappropriate to brag that he had made great achievements last night. He subconsciously looked down at Qin Weibai. The goddess, whose face was still ruddy, glared at him weakly and gently bit his chest. "Well, I just got up," Li Tianlan responded. His palm grabbed at random on the bed and grabbed a pair of soft and delicate silk underwear. Qin Weibai, with rosy cheeks, reached out to grab it. Li Tianlan's palm shook and moved further and further away from her. Qin Weibai gradually left the quilt, and the spring scenery bloomed again. Dong Qingwudi was silent on the phone for a while. When Li Tianlan realized something, he found that Dong Qingwudi had been silent for nearly 2 minutes. Minister! Li Tianlan called out with some confusion. The thing in his hand was snatched away. Li Tianlan didn't mind. His arm grasped a mountain, and in a trance, he felt like he could cover the sky with one hand. Then a bomb seemed to explode directly next to his ear. Dong Qingwudi's voice sounded. Chen Fangqing is dead. The smile on Li Tianlan's face suddenly froze. He didn't seem to hear Dong Qingwudi's words clearly. He asked again, "What did you say?" "Chen Fangqing is dead." Dong Qingwudi repeated it again. Li Tianlan was completely silent. This news had a huge impact, drowning out all other thoughts of Li Tianlan and fiercely attacking his will. Chen Fangqing, whom he had just met last night. Chen Fangqing, whom he was bound to kill. Chen Fangqing, who seemed to have reached some consensus with the academics. Dead. Li Tianlan wanted to say that it was impossible. But he also knew that Dong Qingwudi had no need to deceive him. But how could it be? Li Tianlan was silent for a full 5 minutes. Dong Qingwudi held the phone and waited for him for a full 5 minutes. Obviously, not only Li Tianlan and Dong Qingwudi, but also everyone needed to digest the sudden news for a while. Li Tianlan frowned tightly and said in a low voice, "When?" "About 3 hours ago. The body was found 90 minutes ago. An hour ago, all the counselors were notified. We had an emergency discussion and decided to spread the news to the counselors. I called you before, but no one answered. I just finished the meeting." Dong Qingwudi's voice was low. The previous call was also about an hour ago. That was to say, the council wanted to inform him as soon as they found out that Chen Fangqing was dead, but he didn't answer at that time. Li Tianlan frowned tightly and unconsciously stroked Qin Weibai's snow-white shoulder. He said in a low voice, "What's the cause of death?" "Cerebral hemorrhage." Dong Qingwudi said, "The forensic doctor has made a simple identification. The brainstem hemorrhage was very large, and the death was sudden. For the time being, we can't be sure of any external factors. According to the forensic doctor's estimation, even if he were to be resuscitated, there was basically no hope." He wanted to say something but stopped for a moment. He suddenly asked, "Did you and Boss Qin go to the Hidden Dragon Sea last night?" Li Tianlan reacted immediately. His face was a little gloomy, but it had nothing to do with Dong Qingwudi. He was thinking about the situation after that. "Department head, Xiaobai, and I are not stupid. Yesterday was his first day in Yuzhou, and both he and Qin Weibai had seen Chen Fangqing. Less than a few hours after they met, Chen Fangqing died mysteriously. Li Tianlan and Qin Weibai both had alibis. But for someone like Li Tianlan who stood at the peak of martial arts, apart from himself, there was probably no one else in the world who could understand him in detail. He struck without batting an eyelid, causing a person to die a few hours later. Moreover, it was diagnosed as a cerebral hemorrhage. It seemed a little unbelievable. Normal martial arts couldn't do it. Even an expert at the peak of the invincible realm couldn't do it. But no one knew if Li Tianlan could do it. Wang Tianzong was missing. In the current dark world, Li Tianlan's height was almost unique and could even be said to be supreme. Moreover, Qin Weibai. Perhaps other high-level officials in Zhongzhou state didn't know. But Li Tianlan and Dong Qingwudi knew very well that in the spiritual field, Qin Weibai was the real master. There were too many mysteries and weirdness in this field. Hypnosis couldn't be explained clearly. Compared with Li Tianlan's sudden strike, Qin Weibai was more likely to give Chen Fangqing some hints without anyone noticing. Hypnosis could indeed kill a person who was not strong-willed. Chen Fangqing had been in a passive situation recently and was getting more and more desperate. His will was likely to have relaxed. It was just that most people who were killed by hypnosis committed suicide. This kind of sudden cerebral hemorrhage. How could hypnosis do it? Li Tianlan thought for a moment and said softly, "Department head, I need to think about it. I'll call you later." Dong Qingwudi replied with a and seemed to be relieved. To be honest, he really didn't worry about Qin Weibai. No one thought that the goddess, who was devastatingly beautiful, was just a vase, even if she was the most expensive and priceless vase. Her maturity and calmness in dealing with things could be described as wisdom. In the current situation, Li Tianlan was the one who made Dongqing Wudi most uneasy. Chen Fangqing's death was inevitable, but his death now was a great trouble. Qin Weibai couldn't hurt him now. But it was hard to say for Li Tianlan. He might not see those troubles, but he might not care. If it wasn't for Li Tianlan, then was Chen Fangqing's death really natural? No external factors? He silently hung up the phone. Li Tianlan thought silently for a while and lifted the quilt. Qin Weibai straightened up and still kept her kneeling position. Her moist red lips slightly pouted and she said pitifully, "My knees are uncomfortable." Li Tianlan smiled and held her in his arms. After a moment of silence, he whispered, "Chen Fangqing is dead." So fast. Qin Weibai was shocked. Her reaction also surprised Li Tianlan. The first thing Li Tianlan thought about when he got the news was how Chen Fangqing died. However, Qin Weibai's reaction was tantamount to asking why Chen Fangqing would die now. Li Tianlan frowned and asked softly, "What happened?" Qin Weibai seemed a little hesitant and confused. With some uncertainty, she said, "I don't know. After seeing him yesterday, his mental state was very unstable. I gave him a hint. Under normal circumstances, it would be very effective in stabilizing his mental state. However, that hint, to a certain extent, is equivalent to a spiritual imprint. He will slowly change in Chen Fangqing's mind." Qin Weibai frowned. To put it simply, Chen Fangqing's mental state was very bad yesterday. It could even be said that he was on the verge of a breakdown. The hint I gave him was not to restore stability, but to overdraw stability. His spirit would be stabilized under the suggestion, but it would also be equivalent to overdrawing his mental strength. As time passed, when the validity of the suggestion passed, he would show different tendencies. At first, it would be self-harm, and then it would develop into suicide. The deadline should be around half a year. "Did you decide on the spur of the moment?" Li Tianlan asked. "I already had plans." Qin Weibai shook her head. Her somewhat misty and watery eyes became clear. "We can deal with the Chen family, but if we directly attack Chen Fangqing and kill him directly, even if he retreats, it will cause a very bad impact. My way is very covert. Even if others suspect something, they can't find full evidence. That spiritual hint is indeed to stabilize Chen Fangqing's spirit. Originally, the time of the hint would be up to a year, shortly after the election, but yesterday Chen Fangqing and Li Huaqing appeared together. We can't underestimate Chen Fangqing too much. He has been the prime minister for 10 years. Even if he is at the end of his rope, he is still very powerful. If he plans something with the academics, the election is likely to be variable. So I strengthened the spiritual hint and shortened it to half a year. But why did he commit suicide in one day?" "Suicide?" Li Tianlan was stunned and then shook his head. "No, this should have nothing to do with your spiritual hint. Chen Fangqing had a cerebral hemorrhage. It was a natural death caused by massive bleeding of the brainstem. Natural death, natural death." Qin Weibai and Li Tianlan's thoughts were synchronized, and they both said the word at the same time. Then they looked at each other again. "Is it really a natural death?" For the time being, no one could answer this question. Li Tianlan's face was a little gloomy. Chen Fangqing's death was too sudden. He already knew what he would face next. "Let's go and have a look." Qin Weibai turned over and wanted to grab the clothes that Li Tianlan had thrown under the bed last night. "No need." Li Tianlan touched her hair. "You rest, I'll go and have a look." After a pause, he chuckled. "I guess you don't have much strength left, do you?" Qin Weibai's face turned red. She and Li Tianlan had a deep understanding of each other. Although they were not married, there was no difference between them and a real husband and wife. But in some aspects, Qin Weibai was still very reserved, the kind of reserved that Li Tianlan could not stop. "Gluttony." Qin Weibai rolled her eyes at Li Tianlan and said with hatred. Then she put the clothes that she had grabbed on the bed. Li Tianlan got out of bed and put on his clothes. Qin Weibai had already shrunk under the quilt. Her body was curled up, and only her face was exposed. The curtains were still open, and the flying snow was like goose feathers. Ruthless landed lightly on Li Tianlan's body. "I'm leaving." Li Tianlan bent down and kissed Qin Weibai's face, saying softly. The goddess, who had been gluttonous all night, tried to open her eyes and nodded in a daze. Li Tianlan turned and walked out. The sound of the door closing rang out. In a trance, it was very close and very far. Qin Weibai closed her eyes. In a trance, her consciousness seemed to enter a garden. The bright sunshine was warm and cozy. The beautiful snowflakes were dancing in the air with a soft temperature, but they did not fall to the ground. She found herself wearing a gorgeous and complicated long dress. The color and pattern of the long dress were constantly changing in the sunshine, and it was perfectly integrated with the surrounding environment. At the edge of the garden was a twisted tree. The tree seemed to be extremely old, and it was ridiculously thick. The huge canopy seemed to occupy the whole sky, leaving a large area of shade. Above the sky, the snowflakes danced with the sun, with the same temperature. The snowflakes fell slowly, but they always turned into nothingness the moment they fell to the ground. However, the snowflakes that did not fall to the ground passed through the dense canopy, leaving a large area of white under the tree, which looked a little gloomy. Under the gloomy tree sat a child who was dressed in shabby clothes. He wore a small suit full of patches and looked 8 or 9 years old. He curled up in the snow on the tree trunk, and his whole body was slowly submerged by the snow. The child held his shoulders, and his body trembled. But his eyes were extremely calm from beginning to end. Qin Weibai frowned and walked out of the garden. The garden disappeared. The child looked up and glanced at her. The calm eyes were replaced by amazement in an instant. He stared blankly, without saying a word, as if he had forgotten to speak. "You are?" Qin Weibai asked in a low voice. She was a master of spirit. Even if she was very tired now, her spirit was not weak, and she could even be said to be somewhat satisfied and excited. In such a state, even if she had a dream, she could also control her dream. The garden was something that should appear in her dream. But the tree in front of her, the dirty child, was a picture that should not have appeared. "I'm a little cold," the child whispered. Qin Weibai looked at him seriously. His face was very clear, but the perception in the dream seemed to be blocked, making the face a little blurred in her sight. When she got closer, Qin Weibai noticed that there was a wooden sword that was almost completely buried in the snow beside the child. He leaned against the thick trunk behind him, and his small body blocked the sword marks on the trunk. If she looked closely, she would find that the trunk, which was at least 500 or 600 years old, was densely covered with cracks. It seemed that there were countless sword qi, which was not strong but always repeated, piercing into the trunk, so that the trunk was always in a situation where it could collapse at any time. Qin Weibai's heart moved slightly. She seemed to understand something at this moment, but she could not believe it. Looking at the increasingly blurred face of the child, Qin Weibai breathed softly and said softly, "What's your name?" The child looked at her quietly and pursed his lips. His voice was clear and light, but the content was in line with Qin Weibai's guess. "My name is Li Tianlan." The wind and snow were dancing wildly. Above the tree. Outside the hotel. On the big bed in the hotel, Qin Weibai suddenly opened her eyes. Chapter 1080. When he walked out of the hotel room, Li Tianlan had an idea and pressed the doorbell of the opposite suite. It was Xianyuan Wushang's room. To be honest, Li Tianlan didn't know what Xianyuan Wushang could do in Yuzhou, but Li Tianlan instinctively took this mysterious but intimate person with him. Chen Fangqing's death made Li Tianlan instinctively feel that Xianyuan Wushang would be useful. After all, he claimed to be an excellent doctor, and Li Tianlan had seen his means. Although his means of treatment were incredible, it could be regarded as a medical category that was temporarily incomprehensible. Chen Fangqing's death was sudden and strange. If Xianyuan Wushang could get some information from his body, it might be of great use. Xianyuan Wushang quickly opened the door. He was dressed neatly and had a kind and harmless smile. "Good morning, big brother." Li Tianlan nodded and asked, "Have you had breakfast?" Xianyuan Wuxiang shook his head and said with a smile, "I went online last night and looked up information all night. It was very interesting. Let's go together." Li Tianlan turned to the elevator. "Come with me to a place later." "Okay." Xianyuan Wuxiang took the room card and closed the door without asking any questions. "What information? I can ask someone to find it for you," Li Tianlan asked casually as he entered the elevator. Xianyuan Wuxiang laughed and said, "I need to know more about this world in many aspects. There are all kinds of information, including history, writing, international society, and even language. I can slowly look it up on the internet. Anyway, I have nothing to do." Li Tianlan took a deep look at him. For a moment, he couldn't understand the meaning of this sentence. Xianyuan Wuxiang spoke as if it was the first time he came into contact with this society. He hesitated and still didn't ask anything. If it was something that could be said, there was no need for him to deliberately not say it. The elevator went all the way down. When it was about to reach the restaurant, Li Tianlan suddenly said, "Chen Fangqing is dead." Xianyuan Wuxiang nodded casually. This news, which was enough to shock the whole Zhongzhou state and even cause a lot of repercussions around the world, was not as important to him as breakfast. "How did he die?" he asked casually. "Sudden death due to cerebral hemorrhage," Li Tianlan said. The news began to spin in his mind the moment Dongqing Wudi told him, which made him a little upset. "TSK, he's really unlucky. If he had met me earlier," Xianyuan Wuxiang sighed and shook his head. "On the surface, it is indeed a cerebral hemorrhage. In a while, you will come with me to the Chen family. I need you to help me take a look and see if there is any other reason. Even if there is a trace of possibility, I want to know." Li Tianlan said slowly. Chen Fangqing's death indeed had a great influence on the new group. It seemed to be a coincidence that Chen Fangqing died less than 12 hours after Zhang Tai arrived at Yuzhou province. But things that were too coincidental always carried the color of a conspiracy. Li Tianlan didn't have to think about it to know that he was now the most suspicious target. To be honest, Li Tianlan didn't want to kill Chen Fangqing now. Although he wished Chen Fangqing could die right away, the more sensitive a matter was, the more it needed to be accepted by people. Li Tianlan's plan was to suppress Chen Fangqing's influence little by little, which would take a few months. A few months later, when everything was ready, he would force Chen Fangqing to retire due to illness and handle this matter in a high-profile manner to plant a cause. When everyone knew that he was ill, he would kill Chen Fangqing in a few months, so that he would be unable to influence the election at the most critical time and eliminate the last variable. At that time, the Prince group would have been impatient because of the pressure from the major groups and had enough psychological preparation for Chen Fangqing's death. His death would not cause too much reaction. But now Chen Fangqing suddenly died. Li Tianlan was very clear that he had never been a calm person who was good at forbearance in the impression of the high-level officials of Zhongzhou state. They would even think that he was a lunatic in some aspects. Zhongzhou state had seen his madness more than 2 years ago. Under such a preconceived impression, Chen Fangqing's sudden death, under everyone's instinct, the first suspect must be himself. Regardless of the fact, once such a suspicion appeared, it would first arouse the disgust of all the groups. The disgust of Emperor Dong's palace. Yes, all the groups. Including the academics that were cooperating, the North group that the two sides were trying to integrate, the giant group that could be said to be one of their own, the Prince group that had become an enemy, the Southeast group whose relationship was still unclear for the time being, and the Special Warfare group that was struggling to protect itself. The reason? It was very simple. Because Chen Fangqing was the prime minister. This was a completely different concept from 2 years ago when Li Tianlan slaughtered Qi Mulin's family. Qi Mulin was at the level of deputy governor, and he was not the head of a department. The shock caused by the destruction of his family made Li Tianlan stay in the desert prison for 2 years even with the support of the giant group and the Southeast group. What about Chen Fangqing? He was the prime minister of a country, the real spokesperson of Zhongzhou state, and the number 2 figure. His end might be miserable, or he might not be worthy of sympathy. Maybe, there were many maybes. But anyway, Chen Fangqing was the legitimate prime minister of Zhongzhou state now. If the murderer didn't pay any price when such a person was killed, then what was the meaning of the existence of Zhongzhou state? What was the meaning of the stability of Zhongzhou state? What was the meaning of the existence of high-level officials? If Chen Fangqing's death had something to do with Li Tianlan, then on the surface, no one in the whole Zhongzhou state would say a word for Li Tianlan. Even Dongqing Wudi couldn't say anything in public. This was a challenge to the cornerstone of a country and a complete subversion of all the orders. Li Tianlan ate breakfast slowly, but his eyes became more and more gloomy. There were a lot of thoughts in his mind. Qin Weibai imprinted the spiritual imprint on Chen Fangqing and stabilized his spirit. This should have nothing to do with Chen Fangqing's death, but from the perspective of the spiritual imprint, it was a coincidence. Li Tianlan didn't know much about some of the cutting-edge technologies of Zhongzhou state today. Although he knew it was impossible to tell whether a person had been hypnotized from a dead person, he couldn't be completely at ease, so he chose to take Xianyuan Wushang with him. If Xianyuan Wushang could find the traces of Chen Fangqing being hypnotized, it might mean that Zhongzhou state might also know. This matter must be eliminated quickly, so as not to arouse any unnecessary suspicion. After clearing the suspicion on Qin Weibai, it was Li Tianlan's turn. He always knew his own affairs best. Li Tianlan's breakthrough this time left a lot of doubts in martial arts, which he couldn't figure out for a while, but he roughly knew what he could do. His sword energy could make Chen Fangqing's death look like a normal cerebral hemorrhage. But it was impossible to control the time for so long and so perfect. He couldn't do it, but the key was how to explain it and whether others would believe it or not. Seriously speaking, the possibility that others would believe it was really not very big. If they didn't believe it, it meant that the Prince Group, which was caught off guard and faced with Chen Fangqing's death, would quickly react after a short period of panic and bewilderment. They should have been panicky and wavering, but they would break out a great unity because of Li Tianlan's violence and gloominess. They might even stabilize the Prince Group again with the full support of Guo Wenin. This meant that in the process of the rise of the new group, the benefits from the Prince Group would be greatly reduced. The same problem applied to the major groups. When all the suspicions pointed to Li Tianlan, the giant group, which had originally planned to join the new group to wave the flag for Emperor Dong's palace under the persuasion of Dongqing Wudi and Bai Zhanfeng, was likely to hesitate. The North Group, which was merging with the new group, would have even more scruples about Li Tianlan's cruelty. Military Counselor did have great influence in the North Group, but such influence didn't mean that Military Counselor had any chips in his hands that could threaten the whole North Group. Such influence was slowly accumulated in the long-term secret cooperation between the two sides. It was tacit understanding, sincerity, and both sides were very satisfied with the future prospects. And such a prospect would also be cast over with Chen Fangqing's death. The academics would also terminate cooperation with the new group to some extent. As for the Special Warfare Group, it was originally Li Tianlan's personal main area of influence in the future. He originally wanted to completely break up the Special Warfare Group after killing Chen Fangqing. But with Chen Fangqing's death, Li Tianlan's existence would only make them more frightened. Even if the Special Warfare Group completely fell apart and the people in the Special Warfare Group changed their allegiance, there would not be too many people who would choose Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan ate breakfast and sorted out his thoughts. Then he was shocked to find that with Chen Fangqing's death, the future of the new group and Emperor Dong's palace were cast over a very heavy shadow. People in other groups would be afraid of him. However, this fear was not pure. Instead, it was mixed with disgust and rejection. Even if a new corporation were to appear, under such emotions, its scale would probably be greatly limited. At most, it would only be 2/3 of the expected size, and this was under the premise that they were lucky enough. Chen Fangqing's death is very troublesome. Li Tianlan said all of a sudden. Xianyuan Wushang nodded. As a prince, he usually studied more than medicine. It was hard to say how old he was, but objectively speaking, it was almost an eternity. He had played many roles and studied many different things. Although he did not know whether it was him or not, His consciousness had never deviated too much. Based on his experience, unless there was a new variable, Li Tianlan would face more than just trouble. Let's wait and see, Xianyuan Wushang said softly. He thought for a moment and continued, Big brother, in your current situation, the only choice is to compromise. Even if it's a temporary compromise, after all, there is still nearly a year to operate. It's not a big deal to compromise temporarily. Li Tianlan did not say anything. After a long while, he suddenly asked, What can you see? I don't know. Xianyuan Wushang smiled and said, I have to see it first. Hopefully I can find something interesting. Li Tianlan took a deep look at him and said slowly, Your abilities are very strange. You don't seem to be very old, so I don't know what kind of group you are. I think you can't tell me about this. However, it is obvious that you are not the strongest, and the Lin Shi you mentioned is also not the strongest. You can even be regarded as the younger generation, which means that in your group, there are people who are stronger and more comprehensive than you. So, do you have the ability to see clearly what Chen Fangqing experienced before he died? Xianyuan Wushang was silent for a moment. Comprehensive, he muttered to himself and shook his head slightly. No one is comprehensive. Different people are involved in different fields. Big brother, your request involves time, which is the most basic. The requirement is very high, but it's not impossible. But from another point of view, it's also impossible. Li Tianlan felt a pain in the ass. The most critical words became a bunch of messy notes in his ears again. What do you mean? He asked patiently. My father can do it. Xianyuan Wushang said slowly, That's one of our most powerful abilities. In theory, it's equivalent to imprinting Chen Fangqing into a painting. Through it, we can see everything that happened before he died. This so-called everything was not only what he had experienced, but also what he had thought, and even what he had imagined in his consciousness. This ability will only fail for a few people, but Chen Fangqing is not one of them. My father has this ability, but the place is not right. He can't do it here. Li Tianlan was shocked. He didn't understand many things Xianyuan Wushang said, but he understood the most important sentence very clearly. Xianyuan Wushang said that his request involved time, and his father could do it. Could it be understood that Xianyuan Wushang's father could control time? Supernatural ability? The term flashed through Li Tianlan's mind, and then he asked directly. Xianyuan Wushang shook his head. It's not supernatural ability, it's just... He scratched his head and looked a little cautious. It doesn't matter what it is. What matters is that he can't do it here. Then where can he do it? Li Tianlan asked immediately. If there really was such an ability, even if there were great restrictions, it would be almost heaven-defying. Li Tianlan couldn't believe it. I can't tell. Xianyuan Wushang was silent for a moment and said softly. If Li Tianlan had felt that Xianyuan Wushang's origin was mysterious before, then this time, as Xianyuan Wushang mentioned his father, Li Tianlan began to be really curious about this group of people. That is to say, your father's generation is much stronger than yours. Maybe not only you, but also Lin Shi's father's generation. How strong is the strongest person in your group? Xianyuan Wushang gave Li Tianlan a strange look. He saw strong interest in Li Tianlan's eyes, as well as strong suspicion. At the same time, he also saw a very obvious fear. Xianyuan Wushang smiled bitterly and shook his head slightly. Big brother, you think too highly of us. In fact, as far as I know, including Lin Shi's father, even Lin Shi's grandfather, among all the people I've seen and heard of, my father is the strongest one. I don't know, but now I'm basically sure that it's the end, so my understanding should be correct. My father is a martial artist as well as a calligrapher. He's really strong, but when facing you here, even if he's at his peak, he won't be much stronger than you. I paid attention to the state you used to be ruthless on Mount Dibbing. That state in our place is called the law of swordsmanship. To be exact, it's the state when you made another breakthrough in the invincible realm and reached the peak of the so-called supreme realm, Big Brother. That's also the limit of my father's combat strength. From this point of view, if the current ruthless energy returns to its peak, Your strength with Ruthless is basically my father's combat strength at his peak. As for Lin Shi's father, he's also a very great figure, but the combat strength he can exert is not as good as my father's. At most, he's a little stronger than Wang Tianzong a few years ago. So specifically in this era, Big Brother, you're invincible. When you break through again and reach the threshold of sword law, I can tell you a lot of things. I can't believe there's such a person in the world. Li Tianlan was lost in thought. Is there? Xianyuan Wushang smiled bitterly. Some people exist, but do they really exist? The Sword Dao's law that you speak of is the limit of combat power that you know. Li Tianlan suddenly asked. Xianyuan Wushang hesitated and slowly said, not really. It depends on where it is. After a moment of silence, Li Tianlan lowered his head and drank the last spoonful of soup in front of him. He stood up and said, let's go. Xianyuan Wushang followed him, following his every step. Have you ever thought about what position in Emperor Dong's palace? Li Tianlan suddenly asked. Xianyuan Wushang obviously didn't know much about the outside world. He could already understand the special nature of Chen Fangqing's case after just one night of searching. He could even infer the plan of Emperor Dong's palace from some aspects and then tell himself that the best way now was to compromise. This kind of keenness was enough to prove his ability in some aspects. After all, the existence of new groups and the Six was always very hidden, which was not something that could be found by searching on the internet. Military counselor had been talking to him about retirement. Li Tianlan thought that he could put Xianyuan Wushang with military counselor. Maybe after a few years of training, Xianyuan Wushang would become the second CEO of Emperor Dong's palace. I'll open a small clinic in Xianyuan City and be a doctor. It's good. Xianyuan Wushang smiled and said, I've already found a security guard. Xing Tian will do. Li Tianlan looked at Xianyuan Wushang and didn't speak for a while. Xing Tian was equivalent to an expert of the invincible realm, and he was an expert who was close to the peak of the invincible realm. Security guard? Who could be so extravagant? We're all a little tired and really don't want to get involved in the specific affairs of Emperor Dong's palace. If our speculation is right, I won't stay in Emperor Dong's palace for long, and this precious time may be our last time to rest. He looked at Li Tianlan and said seriously, Big Brother, I really want to be free. Got it. Li Tianlan was silent for a while and nodded. Chapter 1081. The car slowly entered the manor of the Bai family. When it approached the luxurious villa in the center, Li Tianlan saw Bai Qingzhao standing at the door with a frown. He was dressed in a neat military uniform, and his posture was tall and straight. The general's star on his shoulder shone with golden light. He looked a little anxious as he paced back and forth, but there was an unconcealable coldness and murderous intent on his solemn expression as he was wrapped in silver and white clothing. Xianyuan Wushang, who acted as the driver, sped up a little at Li Tianlan's order. Before the car came to a complete stop, Li Tianlan had opened the door and got out. He took a few quick steps to shake hands with Bai Qingzhao and said softly, Secretary General. He called Bai Qingzhao by his title, even in private. Li Tianlan always called Bai Qingzhao by his title. But in terms of blood relationship, Li Tianlan knew very well that this was his uncle. Li Tianlan didn't want to change the way he called him, but he didn't want to hide his respect. From the bottom of his heart, Li Tianlan really had no hatred or obstacles for his biological parents and their families. He did suffer a lot when he was a child, but today he had received enough returns. He left the Li family for Huading at the age of 19. It had been nearly 6 years since then. He had seen the attitudes of the Dongqing clan and the Bai family. He had also seen what Dongqing Wudi and Bai Qingqian had done. Hatred? Resentment? Li Tianlan really didn't care about it. What was a family? It was a proposition so huge that it was difficult for anyone to explain it in detail. Different times, different situations, and different decisions would have different interpretations. Li Tianlan hadn't been in the Dongqing clan for more than 20 years. In the eyes of Dongqing Wudi, this was the family's debt to Li Tianlan. They were trying their best to make up for it. Li Tianlan often wanted to tell them that it was enough, that it was really enough, but they obviously didn't have the concept of enough or not enough. Li Tianlan could be made up for, but how could Bai Qingqian and Dongqing Wudi, who had been respectful to each other for 20 years, almost become enemies? Born in a wealthy family from the beginning of their birth, they were born with not only glory but also the responsibility to maintain this glory. Li Tianlan might have had too many things, even many of which the Dongqing clan didn't have. He stood high enough and was calm enough, so he could look at these problems more rationally. He always didn't want to call them parents, just because he was unfamiliar with this title after so many years, and it had nothing to do with anything else. He's here. Bai Qingzhao tried his best to show a gentle smile. Go in, everyone is waiting for you. Li Tianlan knew very well who they were. Chen Fangqing's death was so sudden that it caused the tense atmosphere before the election to completely explode. At this time, inside the manor of the Bai family, 2 directors and 2 parliamentarians of Zhongzhou state, whom Li Tianlan was most familiar with, were gathered. Later, when those key members of the giant group who did not work in Yuzhou got the news, this place would become more lively. This was the moment when a slight change in one hair could affect the whole body. What kind of attitude should they use to face the sensation caused by Chen Fangqing's death? This was something that every group was currently studying. Li Tianlan nodded and entered the villa under the guidance of Bai Qingzhao. Xianyuan Wuxiang, who didn't treat himself as an outsider, also followed them. Bai Qingzhao, who thought he was a driver, looked at him in surprise, but he didn't say anything. The 3 of them entered the study. The spacious and comfortable study was almost covered with clouds and mist. When Li Tianlan walked in, the 2 directors, Dongqing Wudi and Zhou Mulin, and the 2 parliamentarians, Bai Zhanfang and Wu Jingmin, were sitting on the sofa with a cigarette in their hands. The smoke was lingering, mixed with the incense that Bai Zhanfang had lit. The smell in the study was pungent, but there was a touch of the comfort of incense. Bai Zhanfang directly lit a cigarette and joined the ranks of smokers. He also handed one to Li Tianlan and Xianyuan Wuxiang. Li Tianlan took it and lit it. Xianyuan Wuxiang seemed to be a little curious about the smell of the cigarette. After thinking about it, he also lit it and took a puff. It's going to catch fire. Li Tianlan said jokingly, turned on the ventilation system, and casually greeted several leaders. Zhou Mulin first, then Bai Zhanfeng, then Wu Jingmin, and finally Dongqing Wudi. He didn't know what the order of greeting was, but Dongqing Wudi's originally gloomy face obviously became a little cheerful. Li Tianlan casually found a seat and sat down. Xianyuan Wuxiang, who had been silent, nodded to everyone present and sat next to Li Tianlan. In the study, several big shots, who could be regarded as the leaders of Zhongzhou state, looked at each other and subconsciously at Bai Qingzhao, who had just sat down. Bai Qingzhao was also a little confused. He had never seen Xianyuan Wuxiang. Li Tianlan brought him into the study, which meant that Li Tianlan thought Xianyuan Wuxiang was qualified to come in. It was not that the leaders of the new group and the giant group talked about some stupid rules. It was just that not everyone could hear this conversation. After Chen Fangqing's death, all the spearheads were aimed at the new group. A storm was coming. This conversation might mean the strategic direction of the new group in the next 5 to 10 years. Li Tianlan brought this little fatty in, which showed his trust in him. But the other party sat down naturally, without nervousness or uneasiness. He was peaceful and calm. It seemed that he was going to discuss with them how to deal with this crisis. Who is this? Dongqing Wudi asked blankly. He looked at Xianyuan Wuxiang with some doubts. Well, Li Tianlan also glanced at Xianyuan Wuxiang. Xianyuan Wuxiang had been calling him Big Brother, which was natural. But Li Tianlan felt that Xianyuan Wuxiang was definitely older than him, even in terms of appearance. Li Tianlan shook his head slightly and introduced, "This is my younger brother." Dongqing Wudi looked confused and thought, "Where did you get your younger brother?" Li Tianlan's voice continued, "Xianyuan Wuxiang is a doctor." After a pause, Li Tianlan continued, "We can completely trust him. He is different from other doctors. In fact, he saved my life a day ago, and my breakthrough also has a lot to do with him. So I plan to take him to see Chen Fangqing's body. Maybe he will find some clues. Life-saving grace? They were all stunned at the same time. Dongqing Wudi fixed his eyes on Li Tianlan and said slowly, "What do you mean by saving your life? What happened in the final battle in Beihai?" It had been a day since the final battle in Beihai. From the beginning to the end, all of Li Tianlan's performance, Wang Xiaoyao, Li Kuangtu, Jiang Shangyu, and even Wang Tianzong's sword energy had been sorted out and sent to all over the world. The high-level officials of Zhongzhou State had also received detailed reports. Li Tianlan was indeed threatened, but no one saw that Li Tianlan had experienced any crisis of death. Was it Wang Tianzong? Bai Zhanfang suddenly asked. Li Tianlan shook his head. It was Jiang Shangyu and Li Kuangtu. They launched a sneak attack after I left Mount Dibing. The situation was very dangerous at that time. If it weren't for Wuxiang, I would probably have died on the spot and couldn't even go back to Tianan. It was really dangerous, but this injury also helped me go further in martial arts and smoothly broke through. It was a blessing in disguise. Everyone came to their senses. Breakthrough. Li Tianlan broke through. This was a situation that all the forces in the world had not mastered in detail. Maybe some people would know that Li Tianlan had defeated Wang Xingxiao in Emperor Dong's palace, but no one could be sure that Li Tianlan had broken through. Such a breakthrough also meant invincible realm? Dongqing Wudi looked excited and expectant. The whole dark world knew that Li Tianlan's invincible realm was completely different from the regular invincible realm. Li Tianlan, who had not yet entered the invincible realm, could already fight against Jiang Shangyu and Li Kuangtu together. How strong would Li Tianlan be after successfully entering the invincible realm? A 24-year-old invincible realm expert, which even meant that the next few decades would belong to Li Tianlan. Such a long peak period was enough to make any enemy completely desperate. Li Tianlan nodded and smiled. His breakthrough this time was far more than just the invincible realm. Although the increase in combat capability did not meet expectations, it was only because he still had a lot of doubts in his heart. Apart from other things, if the second heart was exposed, it was almost enough to subvert some fields of biology. The interval between his second heartbeats was extremely long, but every beat was strengthening his body. The excessive vitality showed that the second heart beat twice in a day. Li Tianlan had a total of 2 nosebleeds, and the first time he even bled from the 7 orifices. This was still his regular state. In the state of combat, every beat of the second heart would instantly restore his physical strength to the peak state. It was no exaggeration to say that with the second heart, Li Tianlan's physical strength was almost endless. Even Wang Tianzong did not have this kind of breakthrough when he reached that supreme level. In some ways, it was not so much a breakthrough as an evolution. The evolution of life level. However, Li Tianlan himself did not know these things very well at present. Xianyuan Wuxiang knew something, but he could not say many things, so Li Tianlan could only use the word breakthrough to describe his current state. This is really good news. Zhou Mulin, who had the least contact with Li Tianlan, smiled. He looked at Li Tianlan with very soft eyes. Seeing you, I realize that I am really old, and I have to admit that I am old. Bai Zhanfang smiled. Wu Jingmin also smiled, and there was some meaning in his eyes. Chen Fangqing's death is not necessarily bad news. Xianyuan Wuxiang suddenly said. Several people turned their eyes to Xianyuan Wuxiang at the same time. Xianyuan Wuxiang smiled very kindly. He looked at Li Tianlan and said slowly, "Big brother, do you have any doubts in your heart?" "I'm not sure." Li Tianlan shook his head. When others were doubting him, he also had a highly suspicious target in his heart, but he was not sure who the target was. The academics, the special warfare group, the prince group, or even Chen Fangqing himself set him up at the cost of his life. All these were possible. "Are you suspecting that someone set you up for this?" Bai Qingzhao suddenly asked. As the eldest son of the Bai family and the backbone of the giant group, Bai Zhanfang would step down after this election and give up the position of Speaker of Yuzhou. This position was also the focus of all parties at present. When Bai Zhanfang stepped down and Bai Qingqian went to the new group, Bai Qingzhao would inevitably take over. His position was not completely determined at present, but it could basically be defined. Bai Qingzhao and Dongqing Wudi had a tacit understanding, so after the election, he would still stay in the army headquarters. It was necessary for him to enter the parliament. Obviously, it was not certain whether Bai Qingzhao would be the deputy minister of the army headquarters or the secretary general. This undoubtedly depended on the result of the game between all parties. But specifically within the group, Bai Qingzhao was already a member of parliament in the eyes of many people. If not, Bai Qingzhao would not participate in this kind of discussion. It's really possible, isn't it? Li Tianlan said slowly, I always feel that Chen Fangqing's death is too coincidental. Well, I'm here so we can first rule out ourselves and then rule out the real coincidence. Then, someone must have done it secretly, not me. Who else could it be? If that's the case, Dongqing Wudi's eyes were a little cold. The other party is really ruthless. His plot must be big. Is the position of the head of the cabinet enough? Wu Jingmin suddenly asked with a smile. This sentence was tantamount to saying that it was the academics who played tricks in the dark. Killing Chen Fangqing and framing the new group made the new group suffer a major setback. It had to compromise on some key issues and support Hua Jingyang to take over. At present, this was undoubtedly the most critical issue. President Zhou Mulin recalled Li Huaqing and finally shook his head slightly. He doesn't look like a person who can do this kind of thing. Neither does Hua Jingyang. Zhou Mulin could be said to be the most low-key of the directors in Zhongzhou State. Even Zhou Yunhai, who had the weakest sense of existence, was more high-profile than him. Since Dongqing Wudi became a director 5 years ago, Zhou Mulin basically lived an early retirement life except for speaking out on some major issues. Although the old man kept a low profile, he was very accurate in judging people all his life and almost never made a mistake. His words at this time obviously did not agree with Wu Jingmin's inference. Guo Wentian? Bai Zhanfang suddenly asked. He has the motive to do it, but he may not have the strength. Dongqing Wudi shook his head. I heard that Guo Wentian spent some time alone with Chen Fangqing yesterday. The prince group is in a bad situation now. Chen Fangqing's death is easier to unite them against the common enemy. Bai Qingzhao said thoughtfully. What about Chen Fangqing himself? Li Tianlan suddenly said. Dongqing Wudi was stunned. Everyone was stunned. You mean? Suicide? Dongqing Wudi asked in a low voice. The study fell into silence. Everyone was thinking about this possibility. Chen Fangqing is not a good person. Li Tianlan said blandly, but if he is a responsible prime minister, no one can refute it. I will kill him, but it doesn't mean that I don't approve of some of his characters. He has indeed devoted his life to Zhongzhou State. Ha! Li Tianlan suddenly sneered. He always called me a national thief. When he was at the end of his rope and in a desperate situation, he used his own life as the last bargaining chip to curb the development of the new group when he was unable to struggle. Isn't that his character? There was silence. After a long time, Bai Zhanfang sighed softly. That guy, no. Wu Jingmin said with certainty. He looked at Li Tianlan with a complicated look in his eyes. Finally, he smiled softly. What you said makes sense. He is indeed devoted to Zhongzhou State, but it is also because of this that Chen Fangqing is the least likely to commit suicide. His death can indeed curb the development of the new group to some extent, but it is more likely to cause the greatest chaos. Tianlan, you can't expect Chen Fangqing to know nothing about your character. If he really committed suicide, then he must know that you will not be reconciled. He knows how much power you have now. Your unwillingness will plunge Zhongzhou State into great chaos, which is definitely not what Chen Fangqing wants to see. He looked into Li Tianlan's eyes and said softly, he admitted his failure, so he will wait for you to kill him. After everything is settled, he will choose to let himself die in your hands to keep Zhongzhou State stable. In his view, this is the last thing he will do for Zhongzhou State. Li Tianlan sat there and was silent for a long time. Where is Chen Fangqing's body? Xianyuan Wushang suddenly asked. In the Chen family. It was sent from the Hidden Dragon Sea to the Chen family an hour ago. Zhongzhou State will release the official news in the evening at the latest. Let's go and have a look first. Xianyuan Wushang thought for a while and said slowly. When he spoke, his tone was very confident. Perhaps apart from him, only Li Tianlan knew how difficult it was to kill Chen Fangqing. Excluding the possibility of coincidence, there were not many people who could do this. As far as Xianyuan Wushang knew, only Li Tianlan and Xing Tian, who were in the neutral camp, could do this. But they could not do it. If it was not them, then there were only two directions. Either it was the order, or the shadow. Jiang Shangyu, Lin Shi. There were only two possibilities. And with their strength, if they did something, Xianyuan Wushang could not have missed it. Lin Shi must have known this. Therefore, Xianyuan Wushang had locked his suspicion on Jiang Shangyu. Because only Jiang Shangyu did not know the existence of him and Lin Shi. Only under such circumstances could Jiang Shangyu think that his move was flawless. As long as we really confirm the cause of Chen Fangqing's death and find out the inside story, then we can find out the person behind the scenes. For the new group, this is not a bad thing. Xianyuan Wushang smiled, and his voice became calmer. Li Tianlan suddenly glanced at him and said thoughtfully, "Do you already have a suspect?" "Yes, but I'm not sure." Xianyuan Wushang said, "I can tell you a piece of news." Before the decisive battle in Beihai, Jiang Shangyu and President Li Huaqing had a very secret communication. The specific content is unknown. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.